The hero of our story wished for a happy life, but he passed away before he could achieve it. Fortunately, he was reincarnated into the body of a young man from a wealthy family, just as he had always hoped. However, he soon realized that he was now living in the very kingdom he once fought against. Not only that, but the young man whose body he now inhabited, a notorious scoundrel, was destined to perish within 2 years. Will our hero be able to alter his fate and finally live the life he had always dreamed of? That's what we'll uncover in today's story. The story begins with the end of the world. The heroes who tried their best to stop it were saddened that they couldn't succeed. The leader of the heroes, Evan, was disappointed in himself for being too weak. He proclaimed that the hero should have been Chris, not him. The guy he was referring to was sitting behind him. A lady mage wasn't in favor of Evan's statement. She told him that they still did their best, and she added that if the genius Chris had learned swordsmanship a little earlier, he surely would have surpassed the 9th star and even become a 10-star hero. If that had happened, the lady believed that Evan and Chris would have joined forces to stop the end of the world. Chris, our main protagonist, is a great extra. This nickname was given to him for the countless achievements he left behind thanks to his insane talent that allowed him to master anything in an instant. The journey of the great extra began on the day a 20-year-old who had escaped from a wretched noble house dreamt of success in the Black Alleys. The invasion of the blood monarch of the Arcane Empire, commonly known as the Era of Destruction, had begun. When that started, Chris saw the recruitment posters on the walls, calling for people to join the heroes and be their companions. At that moment, Chris saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He believed that if he joined, he would achieve great feats, and once the war was over, he would bask in endless wealth and glory. However, they were defeated. The forces of light ultimately fell into the hands of the Blood Monarch. Chris was just silent while hearing Evan say that if it were possible, he would turn back time and crown Chris as the hero. They didn't know that Chris had no intention of going through this hell again. Even if he could rewind time, one lifetime of suffering was more than enough for him. Besides, talking about it now was pointless, as he believed the world was about to be destroyed. He expected this to be the end, convinced that there was no such thing as a next time. But if given a chance, he wished to be born as some rich noble's son. Still, he thought it was impossible to happen. As he closed his eyes, everything surprisingly changed. Chris had regressed, but into someone else's body, the body of a young master of the Arcane Empire. He was now living in the House of Dark Arcana, one of the 12 families that uphold the Arcane Empire, as its ominous name suggests. After checking, Chris confirmed that he had regressed 15 years into the past. In other words, he had returned to a time 5 years before the start of the Era of Destruction. He thought he had experienced just about everything in his past life, but he never expected to see demonic beasts tending a garden. Moreover, he knew exactly whose body he was now inhabiting. It was Christian van Baron Kazar. Back then, he had heard from his companions about this guy, and seeing the middle name Van, he instantly knew that Christian was from a cadet branch of the Magus lineage. The Kazar Count family was a cadet branch of the Baron Count family, part of the House of Dark Arcana. Even as a cadet branch, they were still officially part of the House of Dark Arcana, and on top of that, they were insanely wealthy. No one in the Arcane Empire was unaware of the Kazar family. They had 2 sons in line for succession, and the elder, Christian, was the worst of all scoundrels. Christian, a total bastard, caused so many problems that even the Kazar family eventually gave up on him. Chris once asked his companion why Christian finally got his act together, and his companion replied that it was because Christian had been murdered by his own blood relatives. Recalling that made Chris sweat in fear that it might also be his fate. He punched the window out of annoyance, thinking to himself that he just wanted to be a normal rich kid. If he had to regress, why did it have to be to this family of all places? Why did he have to be Christian Van? Why the body of a doomed scoundrel who was destined to die? He was devastated, thinking of a way to avoid being killed. It had been 3 days since he came to his senses in someone else's body, with a name eerily similar to his. And Christian Van was destined to die in just 2 years. The fact that the Kazar Count family, which valued honor, personally executed him was likely because he was an irredeemable scoundrel. Now, Chris concluded that if he just stayed quiet, he might be able to avoid death. Since he had become the son of a rich family anyway, he figured he should just play it safe and enjoy wealth and glory, like hell he would. He remembered Ragnarok, the end of the world. The reason the Blood Monarch waged war was to use humanity as a sacrifice to complete Ragnarok. By the time the heroes and Chris realized that fact, it was already too late, as the faction of Light and the Magic Empire had all met their doom. To survive, Chris knew he had to prevent the annihilation. The Blood Monarch, the mastermind behind the war, was a major problem, but an even bigger issue was that countless demons of the Magic Empire followed him. To stop this, Chris concluded that he must surpass the Blood Monarch. And there was only one way. He had to become the Demon Emperor and rise to the pinnacle of the Magic Empire. The time given to him until the era of destruction began was 5 years. He was still wondering if he should give it a try, knowing that staying still would only lead to death. Besides, if he succeeded, he believed the mansion and everything in the Magic Empire would belong to him. After solidifying his decision, he immediately went to his father. His father was furious, reminding him that he was supposed to stay in his room and reflect. "How dare you shamelessly show your face when it's barely been any time since your last incident? If you act recklessly once more, I'll cut off your head," Count Khazar angrily stated. Chris stared at him, feeling the overwhelming presence of his father. "I have come to apologize for the wrongs I have committed, father," he said. To carry out his plan, he first had to shed his image as a scoundrel. He told his father that he was truly sorry for everything and promised not to let such things happen again. "After all the vile things you've done until recently, you expect me to believe that? Are you mocking me right now?" Count Khazar replied, making Chris wonder what kind of trouble Christian had caused just before the recent one. There was simply too much to process. "Losing your trust was entirely my fault, but didn't I tell you 3 days ago that I had lost some of my memories? As I looked back on my past to regain them, I painfully realized just how terribly I had been living," he proclaimed. Count Khazar then told him that he had heard his so-called repentance countless times before. Since his father wouldn't believe mere words, Chris claimed that words of regret were meaningless, which was why he was willing to prove it through his actions. He allowed his father to send him to the punishment ward and promised to spend a month there in self-reflection to show his sincerity. The punishment ward was a place where high-ranking demons were imprisoned when they committed crimes, a space that shut out not only light but all 5 senses. Just a few days in there could break a person, but honestly, Chris believed it was the perfect place for him since he needed somewhere no one would be watching. After saying that he wanted to stay in the punishment ward for a while, his father belittled him, believing that he wouldn't last half a day in there. "Yes, I know it's harsh, but I need it to be harsh. Wouldn't father trust me more if I pulled this off?" Chris replied. Still, Count Khazar refused to believe him. Christian had said things like this to him so many times, and every single time, he had let him down. Fortunately, he decided to give his son one last chance, but if nothing changed a month from now, he was willing to expel him from the family. Chris knew that without the family's protection, there would be more than enough people lining up to take his head. He then told his father that he clearly understood and asked for one request to be granted once he proved his change. His father was annoyed by his arrogance, but he still agreed, declaring that he would grant his son any request if he truly got his act together. Count Khazar then walked away, leaving Chris still kneeling on the floor. Meanwhile, in his room, Chris was staring at something in his hand when Cox, the butler of the Khazar household, entered and informed him that the punishment ward was ready. "Got it," he replied. Chris immediately headed to the punishment ward in Cox's company. As they walked, Chris heard the servants gossiping about him for voluntarily entering the punishment ward. He overheard that he had once insulted the daughter of the Poison Clan, an incident that forced the Count to apologize personally. Chris also learned that the Poison Clan and Khazar Clan were already rivals, and Christian had completely wrecked the Count's reputation with his actions. He ignored the servants, even when he heard them saying that he wouldn't last long in the punishment ward. He just smirked. As he walked, a boy hid behind a pillar, crossing his arms and waiting for Chris, wanting to see if he would really enter the punishment ward. After a few minutes, Chris and Cox arrived at the entrance. Chris stared at the door for a moment and noticed the Death Knight acting as a prison guard, a real classic Magic Empire move. Just as he was about to enter, he heard someone calling him, "Brother." He turned his head and saw the boy from the pillar. Just from his face, Chris instantly knew that this was Christian's younger brother, a total goody-two-shoes, Tran Van Baron Khazar. To his surprise, Tran pointed a rapier at his neck at an incredible speed. Chris was shocked and stared at his brother. Deep inside, he felt a bit scared, but he composed himself and remained calm. "What do you want? Doesn't seem like you're here to see me off," he said. "You do realize you're the disgrace of this family, right? I don't know what kind of scheme you're up to this time, but if you tarnish our family's name again, I'll kill you myself. Got it?" "That's a warning," Tran stated confidently. Because of Tran's bravery, Chris concluded that Christian Van might have died at his hands. Chris had actually met Tran back during the era of destruction. He was a pretty notorious demon for his curse magic. Looking at him now, Tran actually seemed kind of cute as a kid, and it was obvious he had trained hard. Still, to someone who had crawled through the filth of the era of destruction, Chris could only say, "This skill is just a brat's." He told Tran to step aside. Tran was shocked by his response. "I heard you loud and clear. Now go home," Chris added. The kid warned him once more, but he ignored it and entered the punishment ward without looking back. Tran felt insulted, grumbling outside, but there was nothing he could do now that Chris had already gone inside. Chris walked through the dark halls of the punishment ward. He looked around but couldn't see or hear a thing. At least there was still some faint feeling in his fingertips, probably left just enough so he could fumble through the supplies they had given him, otherwise, he'd starve to death. He concluded that a normal person would lose their mind and hear real fast, but that wasn't his problem. He had been through worse back when he was a treasure hunter. Having his senses cut off was exactly what he wanted. It would allow him to look deep inside himself, the only way he could ever fix this wreck of a body. Sure, it would take time and a whole lot of luck, but the medical skills he had learned through brutal trials back when they called him the Divine Hand, combined with the body mod techniques he picked up from the circus, formed his bone reconstruction technique. Lastly, since he had a mana crystal infused with different types of mana, he might just pull this off. Honestly, he never thought he would get his hands on a mana crystal. They were way too expensive. But being part of a rich, elite family did have perks, after all. Even a spoiled brat's request got answered just like that. Thinking back to all the struggles he and Evan went through in his past life to find mana, he started with the white mana crystal, which was used to purify toxins and waste. It was a boring step but super important. He had to manually cleanse every contaminated part of his body using white mana. One wrong move, and he could end up horribly disfigured. As he began the process, a smile formed on his face. He was confident that this would be a piece of cake for him. The next day, Count Khazar called Cox to his office and asked about his son. Despite Chris voluntarily going to the punishment ward, Count Khazar was still worried that his son might be too broken to even call for help. He regretted sending him there. Back when Christian was still a child, Count Khazar had seen him as a promising talent, so he couldn't understand why his son had suddenly fallen apart. A part of him believed that his son's exceptional talent had made him arrogant. Whatever the reason, if his son was going to live this miserably, Count Khazar wondered if it would have been better for him to be useless or just die. He remembered how Chris had sincerely said he would prove himself through actions, but Count Khazar shook his head, unwilling to believe it since Christian had deceived him too many times. He didn't want to expect things to be different this time. He asked Cox if there was anything unusual when his son entered the punishment ward. Cox was startled by the question and stuttered, prompting Count Khazar to cut him off and demand a full report without hiding anything. Count Khazar clenched his fists when Cox informed him that his son had taken magic stones into the punishment ward, including a dream stone that induces hallucinations. Since they didn't know what side effects it might cause, Cox suggested they should open the punishment ward immediately, but Count Khazar refused and declared that they should let his son die inside instead. 1 month later, Chris' time to exit the punishment ward had arrived, and Count Khazar went to see it himself, expecting the worst. However, Chris opened the door, surprising the Count. "You've arrived, father. I've been waiting for you," Chris said as he walked toward his father, believing he was shocked to see him still alive. He stopped in front of his father and reminded him of his promise that he would emerge a changed man. The Count was speechless, and Chris smiled, recognizing the look in his father's eyes from his childhood. "So you managed to endure, I see," Count Khazar said, and Chris took it as a compliment. Count Khazar crossed his arms and stated that he still didn't trust him. Chris replied that he simply had to try harder. He concluded that Count Khazar might think he barely held on, but that wasn't the case at all. If anything, he never had a moment to be bored. First, he optimized his body for mastering swordsmanship. Thanks to the white magic stone, he felt like every single cell in his body had been revived. The dream stone, as risky as it was, turned out to be a masterstroke. It was Cox who helped him obtain the stones, even though the butler scolded him for it, as the dream stone is classified as a narcotic magic stone. However, Chris was confident it was absolutely worth the risk. The hallucinations drastically shortened the time needed for his complete transformation, and he even managed to create 2 cores, a first-tier magic light. Because of this, he could say he was truly a genius. Of course, he concealed the light core with a darkness core to keep it hidden. If the demons found out, he was sure it would cause an uproar. It would have been nice if things had ended in the punishment ward, but it seemed like someone had hoped the stone would break him down under hallucinations, only for Chris to use it as a stepping stone for his ascent. Right now, Chris reminded his father of his request. Count Khazar permitted him to say it, and he asked for permission to use the training grounds of the Black Swamp Knights. However, Count Khazar was annoyed and reminded him that the training ground was not a place where a scoundrel like him could enter so easily. This training ground belonged to one of the 3 knight orders that upheld the Dark Curse, a place where only the most elite knights showcased their skills. I'm only asking to borrow the training grounds. Watching the fearless Black Swamp Knights in action would be quite inspiring. I don't expect to join the order, Chris stated. His father was silent for a moment, then turned around and replied, "Very well. But if you disgrace yourself in front of the Black Swamp Knights, be prepared for the consequences." The Count was about to leave when Chris proclaimed that he had one more request. The next day, Chris went directly to the training ground of the Black Swamp Knights. The members of the order were shocked to see him. He minded his own business despite hearing the whispers around him, people calling him the idiot young master, and wondering why someone like him had come to the training grounds. He was annoyed but didn't show it, reminding himself that in the Mage Empire, strength came before status. In truth, Chris had another reason for coming to the Black Swamp Knights. His father had commanded him to bring a letter of recommendation from Vice Commander Melon, and in exchange, he would grant him access to the archive. That was the second request he made to his father. The archive was a collection of dark magic belonging to House Khazar, and in order for Chris to master dark magic, he had to enter it no matter what. His father had granted him the request but had also asked why he was placing conditions on his access when he was a member of the family. Count Khazar then reminded him that he had once tried to sell high-level magic tomes on the black market for a ridiculously low price. Chris was so devastated by this revelation. Christian Van truly had been a great scoundrel. Determined to gain the vice commander's approval quickly, he found his way blocked by Trin and other knights. "This is not a place where filth like you can dare to set foot," Trin said, clearly annoyed with his brother for being a nuisance. Chris was about to leave but then realized something and smiled. This was exactly what he needed. "This is your final warning. Leave now unless you want to throw away the life you barely held onto in the punishment ward," Trin said while walking toward him. Chris then asked his younger brother if he would take responsibility for those words. Confidently, Trin informed his brother that it was their father who had granted him permission to enter the training ground. Trin was shocked upon hearing this and was at a loss for words. Just then, someone interrupted. "I respect the Count's decision, but it's not very reassuring, young Master Christian." Chris turned his head and immediately recognized the person, Vice Captain Melon. With at least 4-star magic power, Chris felt that Melon had been trying to intimidate him from the start, but he was used to these kinds of threats. He politely greeted the captain, who was surprised that he withstood the magic pressure she cast. Chris then proclaimed that there was no other choice but to prove he had the right to use the training ground. "How about I duel one of the mages here and emerge victorious?" he proposed. The mages thought he was joking, but he assured them he wasn't. He then added that he would like to impose a restriction on the use of magic power since his vessel wasn't in perfect shape due to his former debauched lifestyle, so a bare-handed fight would be preferable. Melon considered the situation and thought to herself that she couldn't let the successor get injured, as it would be a major headache. "Do you think you stand a chance just because it's a bare-handed fight, young master?" she asked with her arms crossed. Chris then smirked and replied, "We don't know until we try. Who would make a good opponent?" He snapped his fingers and declared that he would choose Trin as his opponent. Trin felt insulted and didn't respond at all due to his anger. Melon, at the same time, disagreed and told Chris to find a more suitable opponent since Trin was at the 2nd-star level. The 2nd-star level was not something an ordinary 13-year-old could reach without talent. Even people in their 20s struggled to step into that realm. But then again, Chris was confident. He was not just an ordinary wastrel. Chris shook his head and said, "No, if I'm proving my qualifications, I should fight someone stronger than me. Trin would be the best choice after all." He asked for Trin's opinion and bravely questioned whether he was afraid of him. Trin was enraged and accepted the duel without hesitation. They then positioned themselves on the ground while the others surrounded them. Of course, everyone was cheering for Trin's victory. "Vice Captain, how do we determine victory? Until one of us surrenders?" Chris asked. Melon felt a little annoyed, thinking Chris was being insolent and didn't even know his place. "That's too boring. Let's make it until one of you is rendered incapable of fighting," she replied. Now that things had come to this, it would be better for her if Trin at least crippled one of Chris's legs. After declaring the victory conditions, Chris asked Trin if he had clearly heard the rules and even teased him, saying he was in for a serious beating. Trin was furious and swore to make sure Chris would never run his mouth again. Chris charged forward without hesitation and slapped Trin across the face. Trin was dumbfounded. Chris ironically smiled at him and said, "What are you doing? The fight has already started." Trin wiped the blood from his mouth and told Chris to shut up. He tried to attack, but Chris managed to dodge. Honestly, what Chris was doing was practically cheating. As a mage, he hadn't even reached the first star level. If they fought using magic, he was afraid he wouldn't stand a chance. But in a bare-handed fight, he had been through countless battlefields in his past life. Now, with that knowledge, he was able to land numerous hits on Trin. Not to mention, in terms of the starlight he achieved in the punishment ward, he had already reached the 3rd star level. The mages around them were shocked by what they witnessed. Right now, Trin was already bleeding, his head lowered in pain. Chris still had the guts to tease him, saying that he was crying. Trin, panting, asked Chris what trick he had pulled. Just looking at Trin's face made Chris feel refreshed. "Trick? There's no trick. Maybe you're just too weak," he replied. Trin was filled with rage. He demanded Chris repeat what he had just said, but Chris lied, claiming he didn't hear him because he was too small. Trin, unable to hold himself back, decided to use magic. In the end, he charged at Chris, vowing to kill him. He tried to punch him, but Chris still managed to dodge with a smile. Trin tried several more times, but the same thing happened. Surprisingly, Chris blocked Trin's arm with some magic. Trin was shocked upon seeing it. Chris then seized the opportunity to punch him strongly, causing Trin to vomit blood and collapse to the ground. Everyone was in disbelief. Some said Trin let his guard down, while others speculated that he held back his magic power to avoid seriously hurting his brother. Melon was also surprised. Chris then asked her if the fight was enough to prove his qualifications. Melon replied yes, and Chris thanked her. He was glad he had made it. Now, his goal was to take everything, swordsmanship, magic, and all. The next day, Chris reached 1 star in magic. Since he was still unfamiliar with mana control and there was a lot of leftover residue from Christian, it took longer than he expected. It seemed he needed to reach a higher level before he could wield the power of light alongside magic. Holding a bell, he shook it, and someone came in, asking if he had called her. It was Marie, Christian's personal maid, a banshee. Chris realized why Christian had a high-ranking evil spirit like a banshee as a maid, and he was sure that, considering Christian's tyranny, it had made it impossible to employ human servants. Still, Chris wanted to change that someday. Anyway, since Marie had arrived, he commanded her to bring him some juice before heading to training. Marie asked if he wanted human blood as juice, but he replied that he wanted strawberry juice. He was annoyed when Marie told him that blood juice was more amazing. An hour later, Chris headed to the training ground. Cox chased after him, saying it was too early to be training and worrying that Chris might be overdoing it. Of course, Cox was also happy and proud of Chris's dedication, even though others pointed fingers at him. He had always believed in him. "Hey, I don't remember ever asking you to believe in me. Who do you think you are, deciding whether or not to believe?" Chris replied with a different aura. Cox immediately apologized, admitting that he had overstepped his bounds. Cox then left while Chris stared at him, feeling like something was off about him. Meanwhile, upon arriving at the training ground, Chris noticed that the mage's gazes had softened compared to the previous day. He put his bag down, thinking that he should start winning everyone's hearts. Someone was watching him and immediately ran to Melon's tent to inform her that Christian Van had come again. Melon crossed her arms, wondering what Christian's plan was and what that duel with Trin had been about. To her, Trin's movements had been undoubtedly impressive, but she had also witnessed how Chris seized the moment and dispelled the demonic energy. She concluded that Chris might have been able to see the flow of the battle. If that was true, Melon deduced that Chris had a talent surpassing Ashad Diran, the legitimate heir of the main family. Still, she saw Christian as a scoundrel who had already lost his magic energy due to his debauched lifestyle, so she believed there was no way for Christian to close the gap. Melon then decided to leave her tent when she heard a commotion outside. It turned out there had been a small disagreement between Chris and his squire. Everyone, including Melon, was surprised since Chris's opponent was already a 1-star mage. Someone concluded that Chris might have reached 1 star as well. "I was looking forward to seeing the great skills of the Black Swamp Knights. Guess they're not as impressive as the rumors say. Is there no one else willing to step up? Surely you're not cowardly knights, are you?" Chris said, which annoyed most of the mages. Someone then stepped forward to fight him. He introduced himself as Thorn. Chris was glad that someone had taken the bait and immediately challenged Thorn to come at him. Thorn jumped forward, raising his weapon. At the same time, Chris was thinking that he never expected the knights to willingly teach their secret techniques to a scoundrel like him. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to steal them this way. He was enjoying fighting against Thorn, analyzing the grip angles, the fluid foot movements, and the mud sword technique he had only heard about. He decided to try it himself, wondering if it would work. And yes, it worked. He successfully hit Thorn with the technique. Melon was speechless. Chris then smirked slightly, savoring his victory. Thorn passed out after taking a strong beating from Chris, who then sat above him, listening to the gossip among the other members of the order. How disappointing. I must have expected too much from the knights. If your skills are this lacking, I suppose the vice commander bears some responsibility as well, Chris proclaimed. Young master, I understand that you're excited about an unexpected victory, but don't you think you're getting a little too full of yourself? Melon said. Chris then stood up and challenged Melon to show him what she had, asking her to demonstrate the true skill of the Black Swamp Knights. Melon pulled a sword from the knight behind her and struck the ground with such force that it cracked. Scoundrel, 1 second is more than enough for someone like you, she said. Will you really go all out against someone like me? Magic usage limited to first tier, dark magic prohibited, how about that? Chris suggested. Of course, using wooden swords. Melon smiled and replied, first tier? With just half of that, I'll break both your legs. She pointed the wooden sword at Chris, who then said, I'm betting my legs. So what will you wager, Vice Captain? Melon charged toward him, replying that everything worked for her since she believed Chris wouldn't be walking out of this training ground after she was done teaching him a lesson. Chris blocked her attack, shaking but managing to push away her weapon and block more of her strikes. Everyone was shocked to witness Chris holding out for so long against their vice captain, and someone mentioned that it might be because Melon wasn't using her main weapon, the greatsword. It turned out that Melon's attacks weren't landing, which annoyed her. She was confused since Chris was supposed to be too weak to be a match. She recalled that this situation was similar to his fights with Trin and Thorn. Things aren't going quite as you planned, are they? Chris asked. Melon ordered him to shut up, gripping her sword tightly while casting her dark magic. She raised her sword and activated a powerful spell, striking the ground. Seeing how powerful the blow was, Chris was impressed but didn't let his guard down. He immediately jumped toward Melon and headbutt her in the face. Melon covered her bleeding nose with her hand, and Chris was relieved that his prediction had worked. Melon was a magic swordsman, and since dark magic was prohibited, the moment her defense weakened, Chris judged that she wouldn't be able to cover the opening with martial techniques alone. If Melon had been a demon truly skilled in swordsmanship, Chris concluded that this strategy might not have worked. Melon saw the blood on her hand and suddenly laughed loudly. A headbutt? I never even imagined that. I underestimated you too much, young master. From now on, I'll focus properly. Chris then pointed to his neck and told her that he thought the match was already over because, when he headbutt her earlier, he had scratched her with his fingernails, and if his nails had been coated with poison, she would have already been dead. Melon smiled as she admitted defeat. She told Chris to name his request as she was willing to grant it, but in return, she wanted another duel. Chris then replied that a rematch should mean she would also grant him another favor. Melon agreed, saying she would grant him anything he wanted. Chris walked toward her and commanded her to kneel before him. Of course, Melon was shocked. She told Chris that it was an impossible condition since her loyalty belonged to the Baron family, the main house of the Dark Magic clan. Chris then informed her that he was aware she had been dispatched by the main heir, but if he became the heir, that issue would be resolved. Melon found the idea absurd, pointing out that all 5 officially recognized heirs for succession were direct descendants of the main house. Well, there's no rule that says a branch family member can't become the heir, is there? Anyway, I accept your challenge, Vice Captain, Chris stated. He then proposed setting the duel for a month from now, as he needed time to train, though he hoped there would be no restrictions next time. Melon warned him that he had no chance of defeating her without restrictions, but Chris remained confident, proclaiming that even an egg could break a rock. Melon was speechless. Chris then politely bid her farewell, reminding her that in a month, she would realize where her loyalty should truly lie. The next day, Chris went to his father and handed him Melon's letter of recommendation. While Count Khazar examined it, Chris claimed that the knights at the training ground lacked basic skills and that training required more attention. At that moment, Count Khazar recalled when someone had reported to him that his son, Christian, was a genius for easily defeating those with solid fundamentals despite his low rank. As expected, Count Khazar was surprised. He stared at Chris, who then casually asked him why. The Count simply said nothing and immediately handed him the key to the archive, as promised. Chris then left his father's office, and when he closed the door, he grinned widely. He was thrilled to have gained access to the archive and even to have shaken Melon's heart. Melon was a demon of the dark magic household. During the Age of Destruction, she became a high-ranking 6-star demon and played a significant role in controlling the dark mages. Chris planned to make Melon belong to him no matter what. Of course, he knew that she hadn't fully come over yet, but he was confident that a month would be enough. After all, he was a genius. As he headed to the archive, he recalled his father's expression earlier and reminded himself that even demons must have familial bonds. He then thought that Count Khazar might be a much better person than his father from his past life. "I won't disappoint you, Count Khazar." "No, father," he uttered as he opened the archive door. Bloodline magic, summoning arts, and curse studies. These were all considered forbidden books in the Light faction. Chris grabbed a book, but suddenly he saw Marie. Marie flew toward him, causing him to scream in surprise. He asked her why she was inside, and Marie informed him that she was originally the librarian of this place. She then assumed that Chris wanted to monopolize her as his personal maid. Chris was utterly annoyed by her assumptions. He sat down to begin reading, but Marie told him that the book he had chosen was a 4-star level black magic text called the Seal of Binding. She worried that Chris wouldn't be able to understand it at his current level. Chris closed the book, crossed his arms, and confidently replied, "That's fine. I'm a genius, you know." Marie was silent for a moment before suddenly cheering, telling Chris that he was not only handsome but also a genius. Chris grew more annoyed at her awkwardness. Marie then asked if there was a special reason behind his choice of the book. He smiled at her and said yes, it was to catch a rat. The next day, Chris returned to the training ground, jogging with the other mages, thinking about the rat he planned to catch. The first one he suspected was Trin, his younger brother. Trin hated him the most in their household because he was a delinquent. The second suspect was Cox, a man who had free access to the punishment ward despite not being family. Normally, for a mage, power would take precedence over status, but Cox's behavior, circling around trying to please him, seemed suspicious. A part of Chris also believed that there could be another force he wasn't aware of yet. Either way, it was clear someone wanted him to break down enough to put the illusion stone in the punishment ward. He decided to play the role of a delinquent, convinced the culprit would naturally reveal themselves. "Damn it, this is killing me," he suddenly said, stopping mid-jog. He walked away, complaining that running was too hard and he was quitting. The mages looked at him in confusion, wondering what was going on. Meanwhile, during a meal with his father, Chris suddenly broke his plate. Count Khazar was furious, but Chris simply reasoned that if the servants had brought proper meals, it wouldn't have happened. His father stood up, calling it foolish to believe he had come to his senses, then left in frustration. Chris watched him go, feeling a slight pang of guilt but reminding himself that this was for the good of the Khazar household. Over the next few days, Chris made an effort to spread rumors that he had returned to his delinquent ways. He harassed the cleaning servants, wasted money recklessly, and even attempted to drink alcohol, but Marie stopped him, separating the alcohol from the liquor. "Have you decided to live as a delinquent again?" she asked. "Of course, it's all right. My child, I'll be with you forever," Marie said. Chris activated his magic and reminded Marie that he already told her he was going to catch a rat. Marie was surprised that Chris had already mastered the Seal of Binding. Chris once again claimed he was a genius and informed Marie that he had modified the spell so he could use it even at a low-star level. He sat on his bed surrounded by books, proclaiming that he hadn't just been fooling around, he had been studying magic in his spare time. Marie finally admitted he was truly a genius. At that moment, Trin barged in without knocking. Chris immediately pretended to be drunk, and Trin was furious. "Brother, were you really only this kind of person? I thought you had changed your ways." Chris smiled, realizing that Trin was genuinely angry. This meant his younger brother was off the list of suspects. Dropping his act, he told Trin that there might be a rat in their house. Trin was confused and asked what he meant. Chris stood up and explained, "It seems someone wants to break me down again. I plan to play along with their game for a while." Trin was shocked. "So all of that was an act?" Chris let Trin smell the juice in his glass to prove it was fake. Trin then asked who the rat in their house was. Chris admitted that it was hard to pinpoint exactly, but he was confident the rat would take the bait soon. Just then, A servant appeared after hearing the sound of the glass dropping. He asked Chris what had happened. Chris replied that the wine wasn't what he wanted and demanded Cox be called to replace it. The servant informed him that Cox was very busy. Chris hiccuped and declared that he would find Cox himself. He went straight to Cox and slammed the bottle of alcohol in front of him. Cox looked at him, confused. Chris then threw the alcohol at Cox's head. "Butler, the wine you brought wasn't what I asked for. Are you ignoring me?" Chris accused. Cox immediately stood, denying any wrongdoing, and promised to bring the correct one. Chris refused, pointing at Cox and demanding, "Bring it yourself." Cox trembled with anger but politely agreed, saying he had some work to finish first. Chris touched his face and told Cox to leave, as he needed to change his clothes. Cox was still shaking but complied. Once Cox was gone, Chris glanced at the table, checking a piece of paper that had gotten stained. His eyes lit up when he found something useful. If Cox was the rat, then he must have been up to something administrative as well. However, this wasn't enough. Chris needed solid evidence. He put down most of the papers but secretly kept the one he found. Cox returned with the requested wine. Chris thanked him and then asked if he was upset. Cox lied, saying he wouldn't feel that way toward Chris. Chris then smirked and told Cox that despite everything he was his favorite butler. Cox thanked him but hesitated before saying there was something he wanted to discuss. Chris allowed him to speak. Cox explained that Chris had some friends who wished to meet him privately at the usual place. He stuttered as he pretended to suggest that Chris should avoid associating with them but claimed he couldn't judge them himself. Chris declared that he would meet them, to which Cox smiled and said, "Yes, I'll follow your orders then." Everything was unfolding even more easily than Chris had expected. The next day, Chris met up with his so-called friends. He sat with his arms crossed as they told him they had heard rumors that he had changed. Chris noticed the lady beside him, silently pouring drinks for the others, which only irritated him further. His friends raised their glasses and invited him to drink. Chris slowly lifted his own glass toward his mouth, then suddenly threw it into the fat guy's face. The fat guy was enraged. "What the hell are you doing? How dare you waste sacred alcohol?" he shouted. "Judging by your reaction, it sounds like you know what's in it," Chris replied coldly. He activated his dark magic and placed it on the girl's forehead. As he did, he heard his friends gasp in shock at his use of dark magic. Standing on the table, Chris smirked and said, "You should all be more worried about yourselves right now." He pulled both of the guys' heads and slammed their faces onto the table, causing blood to splatter as they both begged him to stop. "Why are you doing this?" "Calm down," the fat guy pleaded. Chris pulled something from the cloth and said, "If you can't even figure out why you're getting beaten, then maybe just go ahead and die here." It turned out he had pulled a knife. Chris tied both men with rope and positioned the knife at the center of the thin guy's groin. The thin guy immediately admitted that they were just following orders to drug Chris' drink and frame the girl for murder. The fat guy also confessed that they had been blackmailed with the drugs they were smuggling, so they had no choice. Chris then asked them who had given the order, but they hesitated to answer, so Chris pulled the knife again and asked if they really wanted to lose their heads. The men then confessed that it was Cox. Of course, Chris wasn't surprised at all, as he had already expected it. The men begged for mercy, but before Chris forgave them, he made them swear to obey his every command. They immediately swore, and Chris then used his dark magic, declaring that he would take that vow. The men screamed in agony as Chris used his dark magic, pulling their heads up so they could hear his command. After that, they collapsed to the ground, weakened. The next day, after the commotion, Cox rushed to Count Khazar and reported that his son, Christian, had committed murder. Naturally, the Count was rattled upon hearing this. Cox claimed that Christian had killed a servant who had been helping him drink the night before and then dumped the body in the river. He even suggested that they could cover up the problem easily. The Count was furious at his son, stood up, and ordered Cox to bring Christian to the demon court, declaring that he would invoke the right to a summary judgment. Cox slightly smiled upon hearing this. A few minutes later, Chris arrived at the demon court and pleaded his innocence. The Count, acting as the judge, accused him of lying and informed him that there was a witness. However, Chris stated that it was impossible, as none of the alleged murders had ever taken place. He claimed everything was a misunderstanding. Suddenly, the door of the court opened, and the very servant they claimed he had murdered walked in. Chris smirked and said, "This servant, are you saying that child is dead?" His fake friends in the court were also shocked, as they had believed the girl was dead. However, the girl proclaimed that Chris had actually carried her home after she passed out and even gave her money to pay her rent. She then pointed at Chris' fake friends, declaring that they were the real culprits as they had drugged Chris' drink. Chris smiled in satisfaction and activated his dark magic, deciding to take this scene to its climax. His two fake friends were terrified when they were accused, but they soon lost control and admitted they had made a false report due to Chris' dark magic. They also admitted that Butler Cox had ordered them to frame Chris. "What nonsense is this, my lord? It's unjust. The young master and his friends are framing me," Cox exclaimed in a panic. He then turned to Chris and accused him of playing a horrific prank. Chris had already expected such words from Cox. "My lord, as a victim in this case, may I make a request?" he said, and the lord permitted him to speak. He stated that he wished to interrogate Cox himself, acting on the lord's authority. Count Khazar was taken aback by the request but, in the end, entrusted his son with the matter, declaring that Cox would take the stand. However, he warned that if Chris displayed any inappropriate behavior or remarks, he would revoke his delegation immediately. Chris then promised it would be over quickly. Standing at the podium, he announced, on behalf of the great ruler of the Magic Empire, the Demon King himself, as the ruler of the eastern wings of the southern magic kingdoms, a vassal of the Dark Magic clan, acting as Count Khazar's delegate, I ask the defendant. Cox was now standing in the position Chris had occupied earlier. Chris asked if he swore to speak only the truth in response to his questions, and Cox swore. Chris asked again, and Cox still swore. However, he flinched as he noticed dark magic surrounding him. He moaned in pain, unable to believe what was happening. The people around were shocked, recognizing this magic as the seal of binding, and they couldn't believe such a novice had used 4-star level dark magic. This is a modified seal of binding that can be used even by those with lower magical grades. However, there's a condition: it requires 2 oaths to activate, Chris explained, revealing that Cox had just been tricked. Cox was shaking. "What are you trying to do to me?" he stammered. Chris smirked. "You swore to me, didn't you? To speak only the truth. Now, why did you hire those men to frame me?" Chris asked. Cox screamed in pain, then finally admitted that he had been ordered to do it. His corruption had been discovered, and he had been blackmailed into ruining Chris. Count Khazar was shocked upon hearing this. Chris then revealed that they had already uncovered Cox's corruption, specifically, the embezzlement he had committed over a long period. He moved closer and asked Cox who had given him the order. However, Cox begged to be excused from answering, as he feared the punishment that awaited him. Due to the seal of binding, Chris could cause Cox immense pain without even touching him. Unable to withstand the agony, Cox was forced to reveal the truth. According to him, he had been ordered by Lord Ashadiran, the second prince of the Dark Magic clan. Count Khazar and everyone in the court were in disbelief upon hearing the name Ashadiran. Cox, realizing the weight of his confession, attempted to run away. However, Chris grabbed a sword from the guard beside him and beheaded Cox without hesitation. Count Khazar was shocked, and Chris turned to him, saying, "I have carried out the sentencing of the criminal, acting on the Count's authority." His father then questioned his decision. As Chris explained, if they had kept Cox alive, the main family would have manipulated the evidence to cover up the incident. He didn't want to give them that chance. This way, everyone would clearly remember what had happened. Meanwhile, Turin and Melon, who had been inside the court witnessing everything, were also in shock. Chris smiled, repeating that he had been framed by Ashid. Count Khazar was speechless. After a few moments, he used dark magic to open a portal, instructing Chris to follow him. As they entered the portal, they arrived at a secret training ground. Chris' father had brought him here because there were too many eyes watching in the trial court. "Your statement just now, does that mean you intend to cause trouble for Ashid's succession?" the Count asked. He explained that supporting the successor was directly tied to their family's power. While he admitted that Chris had made the right decision, he feared it had been too hasty. However, now that things had come to this, he had no choice but to support the young lady, as the first prince was a bloodthirsty madman. Chris smiled and boldly proclaimed, "I will become the successor myself." The Count was annoyed and called it nonsense, but as per Chris, if one has the ability, even a branch family member can be recognized for succession rights. That's merely a nominal rule. "Well, if that were the case, would Ashid have tried to frame me?" he asked. "They say your talent surpassed Ashid's when you were young, but haven't you fallen far behind now?" the Count replied. Chris was confident he would catch up soon, but he wanted his father to recommend him to participate in the song hook at the main house in 2 months. His father then informed him that only those of 2-star rank or higher could attend the song hook, and he had just barely reached 1 star. Chris then said he would reach the 2-star level within 2 months and once again asked his father to help him. Days passed, and the servants of the Khazar household believed that Christian Van had changed. They had heard that the Count had been personally training him lately, and they were looking forward to seeing how long Christian Van could endure. Chris continued his training with his father, using the mudsword technique for control and cutting through with the black scythe swordsmanship. He asked his father if he did it right, but the Count was speechless, unable to believe that he had already understood the black scythe swordsmanship in one go. Even if it was taught, he was shocked when Chris asked if he needed to perform it in separate moves or if there was a more efficient way. Charging toward the mushroom, which he treated as his enemy, he demonstrated the moves. Just now, that was the mudsword technique, but how? The limbs of a human mushroom are sturdy enough to ignore the mudsword technique, Count Khazar said. As per Chris, it was a technique of the midsword style, a sword technique that only carries the blade of the black sickle sword. The Count was impressed, knowing this was definitely not a technique a rank 1 could perform, but he never showed it. He calmed himself and admitted it was powerful but believed that if Chris used such a dual technique, he would have a hard time using curse magic as well. However, Chris proclaimed it was super easy, and once again, Count Khazar was shocked by the ability of his own son, who was once a scoundrel. 2 weeks later, Chris felt exhausted after running for many hours. To raise his rank, he needed stamina as a base, so he couldn't slack off. Someone approached him, asking if he was already tired. It was Melon. She said the duel was not far off and that she was just waiting for the promised day. No matter where Chris looked, the pressure coming from Melon was still immense. He rose and replied, Yes, I'm doing my best to live up to expectations. Melon then said she could see his achievement was great, but he was still only at rank 1, and if Chris didn't meet expectations, she would never have to kneel before him. Chris then said it was still a win-win situation, as he believed there was definitely something to learn from their duel. Melon walked away while laughing, telling him his mouth was still alive and reminding him to put up a good fight and make it enjoyable for her. Chris was aware that Melon was rank 4 upper. Even within rank 1 class, there were divisions into upper, middle, and lower grades, so for Chris, who had just reached rank 1 upper, it was still a distant level compared to Melon. But he was a rich young master, a wallet warrior, so he was sure he could find a way to level up faster. The next day, Chris called Marie and asked her if she had packed the outing bag he had asked for earlier. Marie said yes, and she was excited, claiming this would be her first outing with the young master, which was why she had made sure to prepare nicely. Chris was shocked and told her he never said he was going with her. Ho, you're worried I might faint because of the hot weather, right? Don't worry about it, serving the young master is my pleasure, Marie replied. Chris was annoyed, asking her why a banshee would faint. A few days ago, Chris had asked his father for a favor to change his attendant to a human, but the Count refused, reminding him that he had formed a master-servant contract with Marie. An upper-tier banshee couldn't be controlled without a contract. Chris then asked his father how he could cancel the contract, but as per the Count, the cancellation condition was a deep kiss with Marie, and he added that Chris had been drunk when he made the contract. Chris was annoyed with the owner of his body for being a good-for-nothing troublemaker. Back to the present, Chris informed Marie that the place he would be going had a lot of people, so it was impossible to bring her. Marie was sad, stating she had been looking forward to the outing. Chris then told her that if she released her spiritual energy, people would get hurt. Marie almost cried, telling Chris that she had lived in the mansion for decades. Chris suddenly felt pity for her. Irritated, he agreed to let Marie go with him, but only if she promised never to show herself in front of people. Marie then thanked him, calling him a wonderful young master. Chris then ordered her to follow him. As she followed, Marie asked where he was going. He replied that there was a place where they could make a good profit. Marie then told him he already had a lot of money. Chris replied with annoyance that he was aware of that, and Marie asked if he was aiming for gold or land instead of money. Chris then said she was wrong, it was only something he used to do quite well. When they reached the carriage, Turin was waiting. The kid was annoyed at him for being late, but Chris was shocked that Turin was inside the carriage waiting for him. Turin then replied that he would keep an eye on him in case he went off causing trouble again. Chris told his brother not to worry, as he was just heading out for a little gambling. He entered the carriage while stating that demons should always keep liquor and gambling close at hand, and even the demon emperor himself encouraged gambling as a legitimate pastime. Still, Turin wanted to go with him, and Chris then concluded that Turin was worried about him. Turin stuttered, denying that he was worried about Chris, reasoning that he was just making sure Chris didn't become a disgrace to their family again. They then started leaving, and while on their way, Chris was smiling at his brother, thinking that this kid was a naive fool who would be today's prey. Meanwhile, they finally arrived at their destination, and while outside, Turin proclaimed he couldn't believe such a place existed. Chris handed him a mask, informing him that he could only enter if he hid his identity. Chris then also told Marie to stay out of sight from now on. He signaled her to move closer and then gave her an order. Marie left, and Chris headed inside while his younger brother asked where Marie was going, but Chris wouldn't allow him to know. As they entered, people were looking at them. Many gamblers sat at each table, enjoying their games. Two guys were gossiping about them, saying that they looked like an easy mark. Right then, Chris asked Trin if he wanted to bet on how much they could win in an hour. He declared that if Trin won, he would treat him as his big brother for a whole month, but if Trin lost, he wanted him to call him Honorable King Emperor Majesty Big Brother. He then handed his brother a pouch of money and allowed him to back out if he was scared. Trin immediately pulled the money and proclaimed he wasn't scared at all, then headed to the gamblers to start playing. Chris also started gambling and was defeated several times. The young gentleman wins. "Hey kid, you're pretty good, keep going and you might make a fortune tonight," the winner of the recent game said while touching Chris's shoulder. In the next game, Chris finally won. It turned out that his trick was to let his opponents win at first, then once their confidence swelled, push them into making big bets, a classic scammer strategy. On the contrary, Trin lost many times and was already hooked on the game. Chris then asked him if he wanted to go home and call it a night. Trin asked if he had lost too much, and Chris replied that he had lost only 500 rupee. As per Trin, he had lost 1,000 rupee. Chris observed the people around and was sure everyone had already marked Trin as an easy target. Chris was pretty sure that soon someone was going to start cheating a little too obviously. "So, are you going to keep playing?" he asked, and Trin pulled another pouch of money from him and proclaimed he would. While Trin was leaving, Chris reminded him that he had already warned him, but deep inside, he was okay with his brother losing it all and becoming his perfect bait. Trin started gambling again, without noticing a guy standing behind him. While they were busy, Chris noticed something, and at the same time, Marie came back and reported to him that she had found the ones he mentioned. Chris let Trin waste his time playing and then headed to the place that Marie had found. As he entered, there were people inside. Chris removed his mask, assuming no one in this place didn't know him. He then heard someone call him master and ask what brought him to this place. "Bring me your boss," Chris replied. Grantel, the boss, the head of the Grantel Trading Company, then asked Chris why he was looking for him. This guy was known as a shrewd merchant, but in reality he was the owner of that gambling hall from earlier. "You had the audacity to scam my dear little brother, and now you're asking me what's wrong?" Chris said. Grantel then concluded that Chris's brother was the one with the tiger mask at the casino. Chris then told him he was right. His brother was Trin, the heir to the House of Khazar. Grantel then proclaimed he was only running the gambling hall, so those who scammed Trin had nothing to do with him. "Do you want to die?" Marie asked with a scary aura. Grantel screamed and apologized to Chris, stating he would never have done such a thing if he had known that the guy with the tiger mask was a noble from the Count's family. He was begging for mercy, but Chris told him mercy wasn't free. Grantel then said he was willing to compensate, and Chris stated that he wanted 1 million rupee as compensation. However, Grantel said they didn't have that much money, so Chris lowered it to 200,000 rupee instead. Grantel was crying, stating it would be their entire fortune. Chris smiled at him and said there was still one more thing he wanted. He then discussed it with Grantel, and after getting what he wanted, he used the 200,000 rupee to buy combat equipment. Marie was so proud of him, and he was confident in being a genius. The one thing he asked from Grantel was a sword, the Gruna, a holy sword that the hero obtained by offering his soul to a demon. Even after the hero fell to corruption, it remained in use, a blade coveted by demons. But now it was rusted. Chris then said it was fine as he had a plan for it. As they were heading outside, Chris suddenly gave a present to Marie, a necklace that she had been staring at earlier. Marie was surprised, looking at her master in speechless awe. "You looked like you'd be haunted forever if you didn't get it, so I'm just giving it to you to help you move on." "Don't get the wrong idea," Chris stated. "Before I died and even after, this is the first time that I've ever received a gift." "Thank you," Marie replied. Chris then informed her they must leave, and Marie answered yes with real happiness, promising to offer her master even more delicious blood juice from now on. Chris then reminded her he wouldn't drink it, and Marie informed him that the strawberry juice he had been drinking had some mixed in. Chris was hoping Marie was just joking, and all of a sudden, he felt like he had forgotten something. It turned out he had forgotten Trin, who was still playing and only had 1 rupee left. The next day, Chris woke up early because of his brother's scream. Trin was mad at him, asking why he had abandoned him and left. Chris then realized that it was Trin, not Trent, whom he had forgotten yesterday. As per Trin, he had almost been sold off as a penniless slave if it weren't for someone recognizing him by chance. Chris was yawning, thinking that Grantel might have intervened and saved Trin. By the way, your way of addressing me seems a little off, doesn't it? You lost the bet, so you have to keep your promise, he said. He then commanded Trin to call him Honorable King Emperor Majesty Big Brother. Trin was shaking in anger, but a deal was a deal, so he forced himself to call Chris what he wanted. He stuttered while Chris patiently waited. Trin finally uttered it, though with anger. Chris didn't complain. He simply smiled while throwing away his booger and told Trin that he should behave himself with proper respect for his great brother. Trin turned around to leave, but before he left, he angrily told his brother that he would regret this day soon. Chris simply looked at him and slightly smiled, remembering that Trin, an adorable kid, would grow up to kill his brother Christian, but he concluded that it might be because of Ashid's schemes. Ashid is the son of Longam, the acting patriarch of the Dark Mage clan, and the top-ranked heir. Chris doesn't particularly have any emotions about it since he's not the real Christian, but if he wants to become the heir, he can't avoid a showdown with Ashid. Also, he was willing to repay the grudge on behalf of the real Christian. To do that, he needed to get Melon on his side first. Right now, his sight went to the Gruna. After an hour, Chris grabbed the Gruna. He remembered that many mages had challenged this holy sword before, yet the reason it was still gathering dust like some antique was that they all failed to tame it. Chris wanted to see for himself how it would react to him if he tried using it. He activated dark magic, but the magic vanished in an instant. Of course, Chris already expected that Gruna would react negatively to the magic power, but he was aware it was made to wield the sacred power of light, so it was only natural. Still, at the end of the day, it was just a weapon, and if he analyzed and broke down the pattern that rejected magic over time, he was sure he could do the trick. He grabbed the hammer and started wielding it. Every time he hit it, a light of thunder appeared. Chris decided to change to another weapon and continued wielding it. He was smiling while doing it, proclaiming he was ready to keep swinging all night long. A few days later, at the secret training ground, Count Khazar asked if he was ready. He replied yes, but he was curious to know who the lady with him was, though the silhouette gave him an idea that he had seen this person before. The lady turned around and looked at him. He then greeted her by saying, "Greetings, Commander of the Black Shadow Knights." The lady then replied, "Indeed, it's been a while, nephew." She was Mary, the commander of the Black Shadow Knights, daughter of the clan leader of the Dark Mage clan, Mark Longam, and Count Khazar's biological sister. She supports the clan leader and is in charge of secret missions and internal surveillance, a true powerhouse among the Dark Mage clan. Chris was clueless about why the lady came, and as per Count Khazar, Mary came because of the Cox incident. The child's actions were quite impudent, don't you think? Mary said. Chris was afraid, thinking that the clan leader intended to protect Ashid. He smiled at Mary, stating that the clan leader must have a lot of free time if he was paying attention to something like the Cox issue and was getting involved in such trivial matters. Mary then told him he was too bold and informed Chris that the clan leader had no interest in children's petty squabbles but was curious about him. Chris was shocked upon hearing it. He saw it as a chance to catch the clan leader's eye. As per Mary, she couldn't tell if Chris was brave or just reckless, as he hadn't even reached the 2nd-star level and yet had challenged Melon to a duel. She suggested Chris withdraw from the duel while it was still early, but Chris refused to do so as he had a plan in mind. He was holding the Gruna sword at his waist, and the lady instantly knew what it was. "Kid, you've completely lost your mind. I knew you were reckless, but I didn't think it was this bad," she stated with annoyance. She then told Count Khazar that he was bragging that his Christian had finally come to his senses. The Count then swore that what he had said was true. The lady then added that Christian planned to use the holy sword in a duel. Chris then told her that there was no rule that said he couldn't, and it didn't matter how, as long as he won. The lady then told him that the Gruna was a sword even the clan leader had failed to wield, and she was sure that its holy energy would burn Chris to ashes. Chris removed the cloth covering the Gruna. He then told Mary to watch out, but Mary was silent when she saw that it was broken. She asked if it was fake, and Chris allowed her to check it for herself. He threw it to Mary, and Mary held it in her hand, but it resisted her dark magic. She then instantly threw it away. "How did you do it?" she asked. Chris then replied that it was a trade secret that he couldn't tell. He landed the Gruna on his shoulder and said, "But one thing is certain, I am a genius who can wield a sword that even the clan leader failed to tame. That's all there is to it. His father was so proud of him. Someone suddenly came laughing. It was Melon saying, "You really are entertaining, young master. Truly delightful. To think you actually tamed the holy sword. But does it matter? This will be your last day anyway." Chris was just staring at her with a poker face. It then jumps to the start of the duel as Melon charges forward, swinging down. Chris blocks it. He says it's just as he thought. Without any restrictions, her power and speed are incomparable to before, and he won't be able to narrow this gap at all. But as she starts flying in, he blocks her attack once more, and they see the holy sword starting to dissipate the aura on her blade. His father and aunt are surprised that it's opposing the dark energy. Raiden says that it seems like he surpassed her when she was younger too. Marin says that's not the end of it, pointing out that he is wielding the holy sword, as they see his hand still has the purple aura to it, but it looks like it's clashing with the sword's aura. Chris strikes back, causing Melon to block it, and Raiden says that the power is incredible, but it looks like his dark energy is fluctuating a bit. Marin says that's not what's going on. He's controlling his dark energy for a single moment to avoid the rejection and response of the holy sword. Melon distances herself, and Chris asks if the battle is to her liking. She says that she's been having this thought for a while but asks if he's perhaps predicting her movements. He says that he does happen to be pretty observant, and each sword technique has a preceding position. She needs to raise her arms before she can swing down, and to do that, she needs to move the muscles in her shoulders and upper body. This is something a novice and an expert share in common. She sighs, asking him how he's going to predict this then, as they see a green aura start to be released from her hand. It starts to wrap around Chris, and she says that surely he hasn't forgotten that the Black Swamp Knights are spell swords. A giant surge of holy energy resonates from him, and he says that almost could have been a problem. She asks if he had a cleansing artifact, and Chris starts thanking his father, saying he survived thanks to him, but he says that should be in the secret vault, and he looks confused. Chris says he can't help but be a little bit of a klepto sometimes, but having good equipment is a skill itself in a real battle anyway. He reaches into his pocket and throws something towards Melon. As it explodes, she does her best to dodge whatever it is, and Chris says there's no use even if she does, as he throws another one directly towards her. This one explodes. He says that he got that artifact using the money he took from Gurley, and it's pretty effective. He tells her that he knows she's alive and to come out already. As she starts thrusting her blade directly toward him, Chris redirects his blade, matching hers, hitting the tip of the blade, causing it to crack until it shatters into pieces. Raiden says that he wondered why he threw that corrosion marble into the air and that it's just like he thought. His son truly is a genius. Melon then starts walking forward, laughing, and then even begins to smile, saying that this is way too fun, asking what he's going to use next. Marin says that Melon has lost her mind and that they need to stop her. Chris starts to lean backward and then raises his hand, deflecting her attack with the most minimal of movements. He then immediately pivots his foot, getting behind her, putting the blade to her throat, and it surprises her. He says that it looks like it's his victory, asking if she was satisfied with this, and it even cuts her cheek a little bit. His father still just looks super proud. "I love this guy." Melon then laughs, saying if he's genuinely asking that, she can't even calm down anymore. He then says that he wants an answer to his previous request as soon as possible. Although it was his victory, he will show respect if she wishes to refuse, as loyalty isn't something that can be obtained by force. She asks if she continues to stand by his side, will he fight her like this in the future? He grabs her hand, saying that he'll fight her as much as she wants. It then jumps to later, as Marin is looking out at the sunset. She says that him wielding dark energy like that is something special. As we see a man throwing the holy sword onto the ground, he says he refuses. Marin asks if it's impossible for him to hold it as well, and he says that he can wield it momentarily, but as she knows, the waves of dark energy change continuously, meaning you need to constantly change the waves into one that the sword cannot detect. But there's no one who can do that in a real fight. It might only be possible for a demon of Gehenna or the demonic dragon, and if not them, then perhaps a crazy bastard who can control dark energy as easily as they breathe. She recalls Chris smiling widely, asking if it was perhaps enough to earn her praise, and she does look a bit happy about it, saying that maybe her father's long desire can be fulfilled. It jumps to the kitchen, and we see a very evil-looking dude chopping stuff up as he cuts a strawberry in half and places it atop a cheesecake. Chris says that he can't believe he's been making the strawberry cakes, and Mary says that despite his appearance, his skills are top-notch. The York then asks Chris what brings him to the kitchen, and Chris says to make some cookies. Mary asks why he's making cookies, and Chris says to give them to someone. She asks if it's for a woman other than her, and he says that it's not what she thinks, but it is technically for a woman. The York says he can do it for him, but Chris says it's fine because baking heartfelt snacks with his own hands is what matters. And he may not look like it, but before he can finish his sentence, he gets hit on the cheek with a red substance as orcs are going absolutely crazy, mashing up what used to be strawberries into jam. Chris asks Mary if she's sure they aren't adding blood to the strawberry juice, and she laughs. Later that evening, Chris calls out to Marin, who's about to get atop a horse, and she asks what's the matter. He says that he heard she was leaving and came to say goodbye. She says that she appreciates it and that he must be tired from the duel yesterday. He says not at all, but he also has a little gift for her. She sees all the cookies and begins to blush, saying that he didn't have to prepare a gift. He says he's happy to see her again and couldn't help but prepare something. Right then, he remembers yesterday when Chris was asking if there's any particular food that Marin enjoys, and he says that he sure does know how to win someone over. Chris tells her to try a bite because he baked them himself. She asks if he really made these and starts munching away, realizing that this thing is actually gas. She tells him it's very tasty, and he says that he's glad she likes them. She says that she must give him something in return for this fine gift, asking if there's anything he wishes for. He says that he wants her to become his true aunt from now on. She says that since they're already related by blood, he's sure there's a deeper meaning behind his words. She asks if he just wants to have her support in the upcoming succession conflict. She sighs but says, unfortunately, she cannot grant him that request, as he may know adults from the main family must be impartial towards the candidates, as that is the rule. He says he was merely making a genuine request as he wishes to become closer with his aunt. She asks if he really has no other intentions, and he says, of course, if she cherishes him and secretly offers to help, there's no way he'd be able to refuse it. She laughs, starting to eat cookies, saying that she does not dislike his honesty, but since her nephew bakes such delicious cookies and gifts them to her, she can't help but cherish him. He thanks her, and she asks if she can have more cookies next time. Raiden sits there tearing up since he finds it so wholesome. Chris says that if she makes him sad, he might soar and be unable to recreate this taste, saying surely she understands what he means. She sighs and looks happy, asking what he thinks about joining the Black Shadow Knights. He goes to explain it and says something to her, but she cuts him off. She says that he was exceptional in the duel against Melon, and he may even be a greater prodigy than the Elder Clan head. However, his rivals won't be easy opponents, and she's worried that he may wither away before his talent has a chance to bloom. He says if he fails to climb up and over the mountains in this way, he wouldn't mind dying. She looks surprised by this, and he says that he appreciates her concern, but he does not think that he will lose again. She's amused by his confidence and says that for some reason, if it's this child, she'll believe him. She says that she cannot stop him from walking down this path. However, she wants to offer him a piece of advice. She tells him to be wary of the first young lady. Raiden asks why he should be wary of Juliana, not Ashid, as she is the most gentle of the 5 young lords. Marin says that he will soon come to understand why, and Chris thanks her, saying that he'll keep it in mind. She smiles, saying that she'll see him next time and rides off. It jumps to Chris laying down in bed, thinking about something. He says that both his father and aunt are powerful as they've reached 6-star after all, but he still didn't hear much about them during the Great War, and he wonders just how many powerful combatants there are in the Magic Empire, as there must be enough to overwhelm the Dominion of Light at the very least. But he doesn't want to repeat the past this time around, so he must get stronger faster. We get a whole 1-month time skip, and Chris asks his father if he called for him. His father says yes, as there's something he meant to tell him, but then is surprised by something, asking Chris if he's actually reached 2 stars already. His father says to achieve such a growth in only a month is crazy. Chris says that he doesn't know why he's surprised as he promised him, and asks what he wanted to talk about to call him here alone at this hour. His father says that he got word from the main family. He submitted both him and Thurn as candidates for the Sacred Dark Rite, but they only approved Thurn. He sighs, saying that the reason being was that of his frivolous spending, loose womanizing, thievery, and even drunken destructive property, and he can't refute it because it's all true. Bro getting punished, but his father says that he can't believe they're looking down on his son, and Chris asks if Viscount Langham made this decision. His father says no, the Viscount didn't have much to say after his misdeeds. However, it was Lion de Baron. He's a direct descendant from the main family and the star of the upcoming Sacred Dark Rite. The Sacred Dark Rite itself is a ritual where candidates take in pure darkness from the negative dimension. Since the amount is limited, candidates participate in a quasi-death match to decide on hierarchy. Candidates who rank higher end up taking more darkness for themselves, and it ends up playing a tremendous role in being selected as the young lord. If Lion is victorious and monopolizes darkness, then becoming the 6th young lord and achieving his goal will be much harder. If that does happen, his father says that he'll talk to them again, and if all else fails, he'll even request help from Marin. Chris says that's not necessary, as he'll figure things out himself. His father says that he knows he's talented and that he has changed, but he can leave the matters to the adults. Bro really is just trying to be a good dad. Even Chris can see it and says that he appreciates his feelings, but he tells him that he has his own methods. Bro is cooking up something nefarious. He asks if any children of Count Trayman's house will be participating. His father says yes, and that his 3rd son will be there, and that scoundrel sided with Lion, saying that he had no right to participate in the dark rite, and he's merely a trickster who can only control demon beasts. Chris says he's surprisingly a doting father, and he tells him to calm down, as he simply needs to prove himself to them and that the Tramen should be hosting a black pill hunt soon, and he'll participate as a herder. It then jumps to what I assume is the main estate of the house. We hear Marin saying that she has personally checked on Christian as per the clan head's orders. He asks how he was, and she says that he was incomparable to the others. The elder says that he finds that hard to believe, and the child he remembers was a brat who thought himself to be a genius when he was nothing but a false prodigy. She says that he's clearly different from before, and the elder says, in that case, he asks if she believes that the child could fulfill his long-desired wish. She explains that this wish is why her father has lived on, even refusing death through heaven-defying magic. She tells him that she cannot say, but he might be the closest to what he desires. He laughs, saying that's pretty interesting and he shall keep his eyes on him, and his participation in the upcoming sacred dark rite is unlikely, asking if that's correct. She says that's the common consensus within the clan, asking if he will intervene. He says that he cannot step in over such a trivial matter, asking how someone could call themselves a fierce beast without being able to overcome such a small trial. She says that he may be a fierce beast, but he's still just a child, and she believes he should be given an opportunity to receive darkness and awaken his potential. He calls out to her in a very stern voice while glaring at her, and she realizes that she's overstepping her boundaries. He says that he's always been such a man, and he's harsh to those he holds expectations for. He says that since she's willing to go so far for him, she must have taken a liking to him. He then summons someone called Blood Drinker, as he appears in the room. This is the head butler of the Dark Magic clan, named Simon, asking if he has been called for. He says he already knows Simon heard it all, and Simon says that he's dead, asking if he just needs to observe the little bastard this time around. The elder says that's correct and that he wants to know everything he does leading up to the sacred dark rite. Simon says that he understands, but he has one question, asking if he can pull a small prank during his monitoring. Marin looks surprised by this, and the elder glares at him, reminding him not to go overboard. Simon then begins laughing evilly and says that as he wishes while leaving, and Marion says that she hopes that Chris makes it through safely. It then jumps to a carriage riding through a village, and Chris says he quickly managed to reach 2 stars thanks to his talent, but despite all the training, his stamina and dark energy reserves are nowhere near sufficient, and he can't become a 3-star as he is now. He needs a black pill to accumulate a lot of dark energy in a short period of time. For the Tans, the host of the black pill hunt, to coincidentally start beef with him is a pretty good stroke of luck. The problem is that catching the demon beast Kage off doesn't automatically guarantee a black pill. As the carriage comes to a stop, he explains that there is a special condition that needs to be fulfilled. We then see Lardos running up to the carriage, asking Chris what brings him here. Chris asks how he's been, saying surely he hasn't come empty-handed. He says of course not and that he would never greet the young master without a gift. Chris slaps it out of his hands, causing it to fall to the floor, and Lardos looks confused. Chris says that he doesn't seem to know his place and he heard that he's partaking in all sorts of illegal activities. After all, we even get a funny image of him bullying him as a penguin, some happy feet type shit. Chris says that he'll let it slide this once, so he should cut any activities that cross the line. Lardos agrees, and Chris says there's something that he needs and he needs to procure an ash pill for him, asking if he can do that. Lardos says that those recently surged in price, and Chris says that he sees how it is and asks Mary if she's ready. She begins laughing and holy shit, put it away. Where's cute Mary at? I feel sorry for Lardos. He immediately gets on his hands and knees, saying he'll get it immediately, and Chris says it's so nice and easy when he cooperates. He then says that while he's at it, he wants a dagger sharp enough to cut armor. Lardos looks confused, and Chris leaves. Poor guy, but he is not a good person, don't forget that. As they're heading back, Mary asks if it's time to go home, and Chris says that there's still one more place he needs to visit. He sees a potion store, telling the coachman to stop here, and he enters. He starts looking around the shop, saying everything that he'll take, and Mary asks what he's doing all this for. Chris says that he has a use for it, but she asks what use he has for an aphrodisiac, and she starts getting the wrong idea. They're kind of staring at him, and Chris starts to sweat nervously. Then she starts to think that maybe it's time for the both of them, but he tells her it isn't, and she says that she understands. He yells, saying that he said it isn't and that it's not for him, it's for someone else to use. She slyly locks in on the JoJo pose, asking if it could be for the Count. Chris nods his head, and the shopkeep also understands because Raiden's age is getting ahead of him. Chris tells the shopkeep that for the Count's honor he must absolutely keep this a secret, and he says that he'll be careful. It then jumps to a little bit later, and we see Thurn greeting Chris. Chris says to repeat his title and starts talking to him, and he hits the whole thing. He says that he heard the black pill hunt is dangerous, so he should avoid getting hurt. Chris asks if he's worrying about him, and he says that he's just worried they won't have a proper duel. And of course, bro is just hella embarrassed. The Count says that he should make sure to flatten those House Tyron bastards' noses. Chris says of course, and he shall bring back some refreshing news. Their father starts asking Thurn what the King Emperor thing from before meant, and Thurn gets way too embarrassed, saying that he doesn't need to know. It then jumps to the house of Count Tyon, and we see a little goblin saying that he's only going to say this once more, and that Chris is not allowed entrance into the Count's mansion. The boys start getting his back, saying that they can't believe he's acting this way, asking if he even knows who this person is. The goblin says that the young master also has orders, and he has no favor to repay a good-for-nothing bastard. Chris asks if he's trying to tell him that he needs to find his own accommodations. The goblin says that is the case and says so nervously. One of the boys says he's immediately going to go cut that bastard's head off, but Chris gets him to stop, asking about the payment for the accommodations. Then the goblin gets scared, saying that he can bill it to Count Tyon. Chris asks if that's really the case. As we see a fancy-ass courtyard, a fancy-ass house, bro actually went out of his way to rent a mansion. The workers ask how much this cost, debating that it's probably at least 100,000 rupees. Chris says it's not often they can spend someone else's money as much as they want and that he'll give them 1 hour to organize their luggage and they can go out to drink after. There's some movement in one of the luggage, and Chris says that he just heard something only for Mary to pop out, saying that this mansion is just super and that it looks perfect to serve him in. Chris asks why the hell she's here, and she says that she hid inside of his luggage because she promised to be his maid forever. She says that seeing how shy he's acting is adorable, and based on his expression, he surely missed her. Someone then yells, calling out to him, asking what the hell is up with this bill, and we are introduced to Alo, the third son of Count Tyon. Chris says that since the protagonist of the Black Pill Hunt told him to go find his own place to sleep, he did, asking what's wrong. He says that since this honored one can't stay in a mere hotel, he just purchased a passable mansion, and it can't be that he's squabbling like this because of mere money. And considering he's a pathetic person who doesn't know how to treat guests, he thought it was a pretty cheap price for teaching him manners. Alo starts to get pissed and squeezes the paper while releasing some kind of spell that summons a panther, a leopard. He asks Chris if he wants to die. Chris says that this must be the Count's subjugation arts, unlike the Alliance's taming subjugation arts. Subjugation arts are a dark magic that binds and controls the demon beast through fear. There are formulas secretly mixed that paralyze the demon beast's reasoning and cause delusions, fear, and excitement. However, it's a bit more complex than he thought, so it'll be a stretch to learn it all in a short period of time. But for now, he wants to beat the living shit out of it. Chris then tells Mary that in order to eliminate that scary kitty, he definitely thinks he'll need a weapon. She laughs, opening up their little storage, and he pulls it out, telling Alo to go ahead and come at him. Alo yells, saying that he doesn't want him to order him around as the beast starts running directly toward him. It opens its mouth, leaping. Chris raises his stick, blocking the attack, and as it starts to bite into it, it actually shatters it, breaking it and sending Chris backwards onto the floor. Chris says that's not too bad, but a 2v1 is practically cheating and this won't do. If he wins, he'll have to participate as a guard instead of a hitter, and it needs to be at least this much to make S meet, asking Alo what he thinks. Alo calls him a cocky son of a bitch while jumping on the leopard, saying that he's going to make him kneel for this. As it comes in for the second attack, Alo looks confident as it pounces on the ground, but the leopard looks underneath its hands, wondering where Chris is. Even Alo does as Chris comes up behind, smacking him once and then immediately 3 more times with the stick. Chris asks if it hurts, saying that he better not start crying. Aloe creates some distance, and Chris says that he won't go easy on him even if he does. Aloe tells him to shut the hell up, and Chris starts to release some hella killing intent toward Aloe and the leopard. The leopard immediately feels intense fear and starts to panic, hiding and running away, leaving Aloe standing there, asking what the hell he did to his Choco. Chris says that he only used a mere 2-star illusion spell, and it seems that it was too much for his subjugation arts to overcome. Aloe starts to prepare another spell, telling him to shut up once more, as one mean-ass looking horse starts to summon up from under the ground. Chris asks if he understands what kind of person he is. Aloe is confused, and Chris eats his weapon forward hella fast, hitting Aloe straight in the forehead, knocking him to the floor as his eyes go white. Chris says that he doesn't bother waiting for transformations or casting, and the poor horse is just stuck trying to get out of the ground. It then jumps to Chris gambling, as they're asking if he's certain he should be doing this. Chris says there's plenty of time left and he should rest when he can. They tell him he's not exactly resting right now though. Chris asks what's wrong with a good-for-nothing guy like himself doing what he should be doing, asking Mary if she agrees. She says of course and just seems so happy, saying that as long as he doesn't drink alcohol, poor Chris wants actual alcohol, but she won't give him any. But it's not like he can say no. The goblin from earlier asks why Aloe wants them to keep an eye on such a bastard. Chris says they should come join him at the table. He's sure their master won't wake up until tomorrow since he beat him to a pulp, and he'll keep it a secret, asking what they think about it. They tell him to mind his own business, and he tells them to have fun watching him as they continue going all the way until nightfall. We see the goblin and the hyena dude staring down at Chris, saying that he's sure he's a good-for-nothing and it's pointless to keep watching him any longer. As they start to leave, he opens his eyes and notices they're gone now, then sits up. He then looks out the window, saying it's late and he should get moving. Mary, the goat, he tells her that he needs to go somewhere real quick, telling her not to follow. She starts to seem suspicious, saying that she knows there's an aphrodisiac in his pouch and that she knew it wasn't for the count but for him to use. She says that she's already sad being unable to attend him in bed, but she will cheer for his nighttime activities. He says that she sure loves running her mouth and that this is all PG. At night, at the Kitten Mountains, Chris says that this is the secret land of the Count, and the energy of demon beasts is very dense here, just as his reputation suggests. He should be reaching the hunting ground soon. He finds it, saying, there it is, but he only sees 2 guards, saying this is pretty lax, and it's a good thing he learned the invisibility spell from Mary. She asks what he plans to do with invisibility magic, and he asks why she's always making things LW. Chris starts to walk past them with complete ease, making his way deeper and deeper into the hunting grounds, and he spots an altar, saying that this is where they will hold the finale of the Black Pill Hunt, and it's just as eerie as they say. We see that fox-like girl from before saying that the way to obtain a black pill is to make a Kage-off offer its life to him. In other words, he must make it so terrified that it would rather die instead. Just as opposites are connected, intense fear and radiant joy are on the same spectrum. In that short moment, the useless ash pill is reborn as the black pill. That's why the house of Count Tyron, which specializes in dominating demon beasts through fear, is the one leading the black pill hunt. Chris says that he sees, and we learn that that girl's name is Lena, and he says that just as she mentioned before, he was planning to steal their ultimate technique and let the Kage-off run wild after giving it the aphrodisiac mixed with various stuff and monopolizing the black pill for himself. But there is not enough time to steal their technique and learn it, so he has to go and do a different method. He starts to sense some kind of magic spell and turns, wondering if he was spotted, only to tell where it came from. He realizes that he has to go check it out. As he makes his way deeper into the forest, he comes across a cave and puts on his hood before he enters. As he does, an ominous red aura brushes past him, and he says that it has such intense malice, and he can tell at a glance that this is a top-ranked barrier of dark magic. He wonders if this is what he thinks it is and that it might be a crevice of Gana, the world of demons, and he can't believe there was such a crevice linking it with the human world right here. Then he wonders what would happen if he lured the Kage-off over here, and he even has something to do it with. He smiles, saying that he will wait for the hunt. As we see a bat watching him from the ceiling, Chris takes leave. It spreads its wings and reveals itself to be Simon, who says that he didn't expect the little bastard to be so interesting. Not only did he pummel Aloe, he even made his observers let their guard down by acting like a fool. He secretly entered a forbidden area, scheming something, and it makes him want to play an even more terrible prank on him as he walks towards the gate to Gehenna. He puts his hand inside, causing his hand to bleed, pouring out onto the ground. Something then begins to absorb his blood, and it asks him for what he wishes. Simon is about to summon a demon. The next day, as it's now time for the hunt, somebody stabs a flag into the ground, and it's none other than Aloe in his group. Chris is there as well, saying surely he thinks he's acting too cool for someone that just got his ass hooped. Aloe tells him to shut up, saying that he's the poser, asking why he brought the holy sword when he can't even use it. Chris tells him that it's more effective than a club, asking if he wants a taste. Aloe changes the conversation, telling everybody to go lure the kage off to the altar, and those assigned to guard duty will follow him and they'll stand right by it. Simon is watching this as well, and Chris clearly spots him. Aloe tells Chris to go ahead and answer, and Chris says, as he wishes. Now we are at the altar. One of the other guards asks that Chris go hold up somewhere else as he's only getting in the way of the hunt. Chris says that's fine with him if he gets to laze about, but not to come crying to him later for help with the cleanup when they inevitably shit the bed. It clearly pisses the dude off, but Aloe tells him not to tire himself out before the hunt has even begun and that the good-for-nothing can go guard the flag. Chris says this good-for-nothing will protect the flag to his utmost. Chris starts to sit down by a tree, saying that he wants to see them do their best as they're just going to be playing straight into his trap. He made sure to pack the dagger and ash pill with him as well. While they start looking around for the sound, Chris can tell that it's coming, and we are finally introduced to the Kageoff, which is a rank 4 magic demon beast. He wonders why the hell it looks so derpy since it looks oddly cute. The rest ask Aloe if he's ready, telling him it's time. His animal buddy also tells him to begin the subjugation art. Aloe stretches out his hand, starting to cast it as the Kageoff continues hitting the ground with its beak. The others are casting some kind of slowing spell on it as Aloe slowly approaches it with the subjugation art. Something inside of the Kageoff's eyes changes, causing it to let out a screech. It turns its face towards Aloe. Aloe looks scared and raises his hand, only to get the absolute piss smacked out of him, causing him to fall to the floor. Everybody else also can see the poison coming from its little feather tentacle things, and they start to do a defensive formation around Aloe, but Chris says that it will not work and it's out of control because of the aphrodisiac he gave it. Aloe says that it's a good thing they consumed the antidote ahead of time, but it's still dangerous if this drags on and that everybody should do their best to stop it the best they can. They start sending themselves flying through the air, heading straight towards Aloe once more, and they all scream out for him. Aloe, out of fear, looks up, closing his eyes, only to be surprised by something. Chris is standing before him with the holy sword, blocking the attack, saying that his house sure is pathetic and he can't believe they're forcing the busy flag bearer to step in. He'll be nice and bail him out if he promises to call him big bro. Aloe calls him crazy, asking why he should. Chris asks if he really doesn't want to. It's not like he has all the time in the world. Everybody else begins coughing due to the poison, and Aloe grits his teeth, realizing he's right and tells him to help, calling him a bastard. Chris says that he better keep his promise, and he smacks the side of the Kageoff's head. He then begins to use his own version of the subjugation arts, stretching around the side of the Kageoff, restraining it. Aloe is surprised, asking how he's using this. Chris asks if he really thought his family were the only ones who could use it. As long as it's not a secret technique, something like the intermediate subjugation art is nothing. As he rotates his body, grabbing onto the chains that have been created from the art, he then starts to pull back on them, kind of like reins, and jumps on the back of the Kageoff. It starts screeching and running, and Aloe yells, telling him to wait because over there is a crevice. As he tries warning him, Chris smiles as he already knew this from last night, and he heads straight towards it. The Kageoff starts going crazy, and he says this is surely the first time it's seen the malice of Gehenna and tells the Kageoff to be terrified. Its eyes, which were a very bright red, shift to a very bright yellow color instead. Chris says, now, as he tightens the grip on his dagger, stabbing the Kageoff, killing it on the spot. The rest run in, asking him if he's okay, warning him that this cave is extremely dangerous, so they need to hurry up and get out. Chris tells them not to be such wimps and asks them what they should do if it turned out to be an ash pill and not a black pill. Aloe starts to feel frustrated, and his boy asks Chris what the hell he's going to do about this because if he didn't intervene, but Aloe tells him that this is enough and to leave it. He then calls out to Chris, thanking him for rescuing his subordinates, and they got to finish without any major injuries thanks to him. Chris is surprised he admitted that to him and says that he actually feels a bit bad now, and it makes him feel even worse knowing he swapped out the black pill. Still, he must do what he must do, and he tells him to call him big bro since he promised. After all, Chris asks if he's going to go back on his word, and Aloe says he's never made such a promise and he's 2 years older than him. The entire cave begins to shake, and people start falling over due to the intense pressure. Aloe asks what's going on, and Chris starts to know what it is as we see two giant blue eyes appear in front of them. Chris starts to look a bit anxious, and we hear a monster saying that it's the first time it's seen a plaything in a while. Chris says this is a demon of Gehenna. Aloe, shaking with fear, tells Chris to run away since he's an outsider and that he should save himself. Chris spots Simon up on the ceiling and rotates his wrist, getting the dagger ready, yeeting it straight towards him. It goes straight through Simon, or at least it turns out that's his familiar that he was using to keep watch over things. As it starts to lose connection, Simon is surprised, asking when he noticed, and he was planning on stopping the demon after observing for a bit. Now that the bat clone he planned to use to teleport there is gone, it'll take him at least 5 minutes to get there, even if he uses blood magic to its limits, and if he gets there too late, everybody will die. He immediately starts leaving. Turns out he's not a bad guy, and he's just wanting to play a prank like he said. The demon calls that interesting, asking Chris what he's scheming. Chris says he just doesn't like it when people try to take sneak peeks at him, and the demon laughs, saying that he sure does have a lot of concerns for a dead man. Chris says if you were to compare him to the demons he faced during the Age of Destruction, he would have to be a low-ranking demon, but he is at least a 5-star, and he's not someone that he can currently face. He then raises his finger up into the sky, saying that it's not all bad as he uses the same spell to put everybody else to sleep like he did that one girl when Lardos and Pomodore were trying to kill her. Aloe's subordinates start to lose consciousness. Aloe yells, asking what the hell he's doing when they need to fight together. Chris says that he sure does have a strong resistance to magic and hits him straight in the gut, telling him to go to sleep already. I think he just killed him, rip. The demon asks if he's going to offer them to him and that he shall spare his life and even personally bless him in exchange for the sacrifices. Chris tells him to stop yapping and that it's his principle to not associate with demons as he starts to unsheath the holy sword. The demon recognizes it, saying that the idea is commendable, but a holy sword that he cannot use is merely a piece of junk. As he starts to prepare a spell, it shoots out directly towards Chris. He blocks it with his sword, but it's not enough as it sends him flying into the wall of the cave, knocking him unconscious. The demon then grabs him by his arm and lifts him into the air, saying that he shall give him a chance to offer them to him, and then he shall spare his insignificant life. Chris spits in his face and asks why he thinks he can't use the holy sword. He manages to free himself from its grasp and grabs onto his legs, tucking as he lands the flip onto the ground. He then starts to use his other energy core as the holy sword's tip begins to regrow using aura, and the demon looks nervous, asking how a fiend like himself can use the power of light. Chris asks if he's finally feeling as if his life is in danger. The demon says that this isn't going to stop him as he starts to form a giant red orb directly in front of Chris. Chris readies himself, taking a slightly wider stance, and yells, using the Dead Sea cleaving light as he swings his sword down, sending out a giant yellow wave directly towards the demon. The demon says, "This can't be," as it takes the attack. It lets out a scream, and I'm assuming that he kills it because it drops to the floor. Chris' eyes look extremely tired, and he says that he pushed his body too hard as his vision grows more narrow with every passing second. He starts to fall over onto the ground and begins to lose focus. We then see his past life, and Evan is asking him if he really replicated his ability. Chris says that it was sort of like this, and Evan says that he sure is something and that the Dead Sea cleaving light literally signifies the single flash of light that divides the Dead Sea. But it's ironic, despite using the sword technique, he failed to become the light of the Mir clan, but Chris surely will become the light who will save the world. As we see a blue finger touch a puddle, we see Chris still on the verge of death, and the woman says that this is interesting. She says that her name is Manhwa, the first seat of Gehenna's 7th realm. The reinforcements are now entering the cave too, with healing potions, and Chris closes his eyes as Manhwa says that she looks forward to his actions in the future. It then jumps to the manor of Count Timon. Chris says that his head hurts and he can't believe that he's been laying here for 2 whole days, and it's been a complete waste of time, but his body still seems fine. He starts looking around for the black pill, spotting it beside him, saying, "This is great." He mentions the Manhwa thing, saying that it was unwanted attention. Occasionally, fiends who stand out early on receive a demon's blessing and can be nurtured quickly, but he doesn't care since it's something bad guys receive. But a 7th world demon wouldn't even be that high level to begin with. Some giant lion-like dude enters the room, asking Chris how his body is, and we are introduced to the patriarch of House Tyon, the Count. Chris greets him and goes to get up to bow, but the Count tells him that he should just rest. Chris wonders what's going on, and he says yesterday they organized an investigation squad and checked the cave. It seems that someone had tampered with the magic circle that seals the entrance to Gehenna. Fortunately, it seems the demon kin was reverse summoned in the meantime, but no matter how much of a fleeting moment it was more than enough time for everyone to lose their lives. Chris wonders if they really believe it was a reverse summon, but it doesn't make sense since it would be difficult for them to even consider that he killed it. Since he doesn't need to think of an excuse, that's A+. The Count says that he would like to start with an apology. He's sorry for treating him so poorly, using only the rumors of him being a good-for-nothing. He then bows, thanking him, saying that he is a benefactor of House Tyan, and he is grateful for him. Chris tells him, not at all, and as a member of the Dark Magic clan he just did what he needed to do as they are family, after all. While it does hurt his conscience, he decides to muddy the water a little bit, but it seems like that resonates with the Count. He says, that's right, and if there is something he can help with, then he should let him know. As long as it isn't something impossible, he will make sure it will happen. Chris thinks about it, saying, in that case, I hope that House Tyan will shake off the old grudge against House Khazar. Instead of the enemy-like relationship they have now, where they keep baring their fangs at each other, he wishes that they would have a friendly but competitive relationship where they can plan for proper advancements together, something that matches the fact that they are bloodline kin. The Count goes to say something, but Chris says that he's sure he also knows the reason why their two houses are feuding is because of the behind-the-scenes work of the main clan, since if the branch families work together, from the main clan's perspective, they may feel threatened, and it's a scheme to keep them as mere dogs who guard the house. The Count asks if he's planning a revolt against the main clan, and Chris says that he has no such thoughts. The Count can't believe that he would think so far ahead, and Chris thanks him for the praise, asking if he'll accept his request. The Count sighs, saying that for the first time in a while, he should contact Count Khazar, but before he finishes his sentence, he calls him by his name instead. Chris smiles, saying, that's right, and if he just unites their forces like this, one at a time, they can establish a much firmer front during the Age of Destruction. The Count then taps Alo's back, asking him what he's waiting for, saying that his son had something he wanted to say. Alo tells him to take this, and we see him embarrassed as he holds out the ash pill. He says when he came inside the cave, it was on the floor, and since he showed no signs of waking up, he made sure to take care of it. Chris says if it happens to be that he is so grateful that he wants to give him more things, he can do that too. Alo starts barking at him, and the Count laughs, saying that he shall give him a gift instead. It's a summoning stone that can store up to a rank 4 demon beast. Chris says this is a really rare item. The Count says that he'll also make a report so that he can participate in the sacred dark rite and wishes him good results. Chris thanks him for both the gift and his encouragement. The Count then tells him to rest up as he and Alo leave. Chris smiles and tells somebody to come out from behind the curtain. We see a red aura, and Simon says, as expected, it wasn't a coincidence that he had discovered him. To think that he could see through stealth that even the Count could not. Chris said that he could smell the scent of blood. Simon introduces himself as the head butler of the Dark Magic clan. Chris wonders if this means that he is the Elder Head's henchman. Chris then wonders where he's heard the name Simon before and says that this is the master of the Bloodshadow Mages. He explains that the Bloodshadow Mages don't differentiate between the Magic Empire and the Dominion of Light. They are a psychotic organization that revels in indiscriminate slaughter and terrorism. The leader was a fiend who reached the heights of 8 stars, and during the endgame of the Age of Destruction he reached 9 stars and became the 10th Demon King. He can't even count how many times they almost died because of that leader, and not to mention Simon is the blood and flesh of the Demon King of Carnage. Simon said that he never thought that the young master would be this amazing. Not only that, but to think that he could even eliminate a demon. Chris says that he's certain that he took care of it alone, asking if he might have seen the Dead Sea cleaving light. Simon denies it, saying that he has no idea what he's talking about. Simon says that he can tell he's playing dumb. After having gone to the cave, even the Demon Kin's corpse was completely annihilated, leaving no trace, and that it was not a reverse summoning. For it to be completely vaporized inside the cave, he's impressed by his skills, and he wants him to explain how he did it, as he should understand what he's saying since it will all be reported to the Elder Clan head. Chris asks why he should reveal his trump card. Simon reminds him that this will be reported to the Elder, and Chris says that if he were the Elder Clan head, instead of a little nerd who answers every question, he would like a predator who keeps their claws hidden to the very end. Simon looks surprised, saying that he surely is an interesting person, and Chris asks if he's not going to apologize. Simon asks what for, and Chris says it's normally difficult to differentiate between a reverse summoning and annihilation just using traces. That's why the Count misunderstood it to be reverse summoning. However, there must be a reason he believes it to be the opposite, and it's simple once he thinks about it, and that is because he was the summoner himself. A demonkin summoning case where a member of the clan almost died would sure be some crazy news and might even be overheard by the elder clan head. Simon says that he will take responsibility, and Chris decides to keep it the secret instead. He should remember this and that he owes him a big favor. Simon looks surprised, asking if this is a deal, and Chris says that it would be great if that's how he decided to understand it. Simon says that this is understood and he won't forget this mercy that he's shown him, and it was great meeting him today, and he hopes to see him again soon, and he'll be counting down the days until he arrives at the main clan. Chris explains that Simon is a person who will have an important role to play during the Age of Destruction, therefore he absolutely needs to form a connection in order to change the future. We see Chris's luggage floating through the air as Mary says that she's finished the preparations to return home. He tells her good work, and Aloe opens the door and peers in, asking if he's leaving now. Chris reminds him to use his title, and Aloe asks what he means. Chris says that he let it slide yesterday in front of the Count, but a promise is a promise and that he has to call him Big Bro from now on. Aloe says that he already told him he's 2 years older than he is, and Chris asks if he has something he wanted to say. Aloe says that he came to warn him. He said that they were all a family, and after hearing that, he felt that it wasn't right to do this to family and to be careful, as he's sure he's already aware. But the one that was most against his attendance of the sacred dark rite was young Master Loin. He should know that even 2 stars are not of the same level between the main families and branch families. The greatest elixir, the ultimate techniques of the main family, and blessings of dark magic. The starting line for direct descendants is much further ahead than where the branch families begin. He's going to be easy pickings. Chris smiles, saying that he'll give him a warning as well and calls him Little Bro. He tells him not to participate in the upcoming sacred dark rite, as he's saying this for his own good. Aloe says that he was only saying this out of worry and he's not letting him monopolize the pure dark energy. Chris tells him to keep this in mind. No matter who his opponents are, they'll come to regret facing him in the sacred dark rite. Aloe starts to get pissed, and Chris tells Mary it's time to go, and he tells Aloe to think about it and not to regret it later. He heads back to the house of Count Khazar. We see Thurn going to find his brother but only being informed that he left for the training cave immediately upon returning. The butler says that he wished to train alone until the sacred dark rite. We see Thurn finally catch up to him, and he calls him his full title, the Honorable King Emperor Majesty Brother. Thurn says that he promised him that he'd duel him once he returned. Chris is surprised by how much he's grown in such a short time and that he's already a middle 2-star, and he sure is growing quickly. He says that he's busy and needs to train. Chris realizes that he's also participating in the upcoming sacred dark rite, and that won't do. He tells him to wait for now, and they can duel after he's done training and that he should train too. TH wants him to promise that he won't push it further back and it won't be anything like last time, so to watch out. Chris says okay and Thurn walks away. Chris says that he sure is a stubborn brat, and we see a girl asking if he promised. Chris says that he reminds him of her a lot. In the training area, we see Chris sitting in his bed, looking down at the black pill, thinking about it. He says he has half a month until the rite, and he starts to chomp into it. He says, "This tastes like straight ass." Then he lays down, starting to actually try his best to absorb it. As it floats through his pathways, he says it's more turbulent than he expected. He then starts to feel a weird sensation, asking what this is and if that is light force he senses within the pill. He wonders if the elation that the monster experienced upon death became a part of the pill, and he says no wonder they are difficult for fiends to absorb. But that is all irrelevant to him. As he continues absorbing it into all of his pathways, he says all that's left is this light force and that fiends would normally expel this energy with the help of their teacher. But why should he let such a nice thing go to waste? Then, he's going to take it all into his light core and absorb both of them at the exact same time. As he has both light and dark flying through his pathways, each one going to their respective core, taking every single thing this pill has to offer, Chris opens his eyes to reveal a very bright light, only to close them once more to show off the darkness this time. A little later, we see a woman telling someone to enter, and he says that he has a report on the investigation she requested. He says that during the black pill hunt, there was an incident where a demon-kin was summoned, but he survived it, and he's sorry that the investigation took longer because he had to look into the incident as well. She tells him good work, and he says that unless she has any more questions, he shall take his leave. As she's looking at a photo of Chris, we learn that her name is Eidline. We then get another time skip of half a month, and Thurn is knocking on the door, saying that today is the promised day. Chris tells him to enter, and does so. He's surprised. Chris says that since he's coming first thing in the morning, he must be really looking forward to getting pummeled. Taich is just wondering what's going on since his presence leaks beyond what it was half a month ago and tells him not to make him laugh. Chris says that if he's that desperate for a taste of an ass-whooping, he'll grant him one right now. But if he wins, he should give up on participating in the upcoming sacred dark rite. Thurn asks what he's saying, and Chris says that, as he knows, it's a competition, and weaklings should stay out of it. Thurn tells him to shut up and raise his sword. Chris says that he's so blind to him showing brotherly concern, and he guesses that he needs to knock it into his skull for him to get it. He dashes off the ground, screaming. It then jumps to Taich being in the infirmary. He got off-screened. Their father says that Chris went overboard and that the healer said that he'll be on bed rest for half a month, and he guesses Taich will have no choice but to wait for the next rite. Thurn tries to argue against it, and Chris says that he wants a moment alone with him. His father says okay, and then he'll let them talk it out as brothers. After he leaves, Chris approaches the bed, asking what he's pouting for and not to whine like a baby when he's the one who asked for the fight. Thurn says that he must truly dislike seeing him grow as he mocks him and looks down on his achievements. And now he's deliberately injuring him so he can't participate in the sacred rite. Chris says that he's going to cry at this rate, and he thinks that they aren't on the same page here. He did that in hopes of him becoming stronger. For him, if they compete against each other in the rite, he will forever lose his chance to obtain pure dark energy. And he needs to be rough because of how stubborn he is, asking if he understands. But most importantly, pure dark energy doesn't suit him. Taich asks what he means, and Chris says that his best-suited energy is gray dark energy instead. We learn that just like how the power of light divides into various types, there are also a variety of dark energies. Pure dark energy is the highest attribute of all dark energies. Right below it is gray dark energy, a type suited for curse magic. And he says surely he's found it easier to master curse magic than swordsmanship. Thurn asks how he knows this, and Chris says that he can't tell him that he learned the future and that he should come up with a decent excuse, saying that he can tell that much while sparring with him. Chris tells him that if he takes in pure dark energy before he masters gray dark energy, it can cause problems when he tries to learn it later. Of course, it won't be impossible since pure dark energy is the higher attribute, but he'll be impeded by its unique properties, and it will only slow him down. And he wants to become as strong as possible as soon as possible, and he wants him to think these things over before participating in the rite. And this is his sincere advice to him as an older brother rooting for his younger brother's growth. Thurn looks super touched, and then Chris gives him a gift. Thurn sees it and recognizes it as an ash pill, asking why he's giving him such a valuable item. Chris says that's because he's his little brother, asking what other reason he needs, and he already ate something better anyway. He even starts to tear up, and damn, this is just way too wholesome. He says if he was capable of changing like this, he wonders why he acted like a crazy person even when their mother was on her deathbed and if he knows how much heartache their mother suffered through because of him. Chris stares at him and sits down beside him, saying that he didn't understand it back then. It then jumps to later as the carriages come to a stop. Chris exits, saying that he needs a good stretch, asking how far they traveled since his whole body aches. And he asks if it would hurt for them to open the warp gate, and he can't believe they're being this petty. This is going to change once he becomes the clan head. Mary then flies in, saying that she can't believe they're going on a date with just the two of them. Also, that this is making her heart go crazy. Chris says that she doesn't even have a heart. And he explains that because the main family limited him to bringing one companion, he can only come with Mary since she's attached to him due to their pact. He sees other people talking about him, and Mary says that he is already famous. We then hear Simon calling him the young master, and everybody else is surprised as they recognize him and ask what the head butler is doing greeting the good-for-nothing. Simon says that it's only been half a month, but he's managed to grow so much more, and Chris asks if the elder clan head's aide has nothing better to do with his time. Simon says nonsense, as he is here on his orders specifically and that the elder clan head would like to meet him personally. Simon says that he doesn't even seem surprised, asking if he was expecting this, and Chris says that no, he actually was surprised, but Simon says that's not what he saw. It then jumps to the clan head's room, and Simon says that he's brought him. The Duke says good and tells Chris that it's been a while, as we see Marin with him too. Chris starts to feel a very powerful gaze, saying that this presence is dominating and he can barely stand from the pressure alone, and for him to exude such dark energy despite knowing that someone of his level can't withstand it is pretty crazy. His hands start shaking and he lowers his head, greeting the Duke. The Duke asks if he was not surprised by the sudden meeting with him, and Chris says that he expected him to call him. The Duke asks why, and Chris says that it's because a new star has appeared in the clan. The Duke laughs, saying that's correct. Neither Marin nor Simon could hold back their compliments, and yet he can't quite tell if he should have any expectations. Chris doesn't reply yet, as the Duke continues saying that no matter how great of a seed he may be, only time will tell how he will grow in the future. He could be a sapling that withers away as soon as he sprouts above ground. Chris says that he is correct, he is still too lacking to match his expectations. The Duke asks if he's saying he won't be able to in the future, and Chris says that only time will tell if a sapling will surpass expectations and grow into a great tree, or perhaps it will even grow into an abnormality that casts a shadow upon a great tree. At the very least, he knows he will not disappoint him. The Duke laughs once more and says that he shall have high hopes for him and that he is now excused. After he leaves, Marin asks him what he thinks, and he says that he was beyond his expectations. However, because he holds such great talent, his fate will be much more turbulent, and she knows as well that the bloody winds blowing towards the magic empire will soon be coming their way. But that's not terrible news because a small hope has actually sprouted today. Marin looks surprised by this, and the Duke says that he might actually indeed be able to fulfill his long-desired wish. It is now the eve of the sacred dark rite, and they start announcing the arrival of Count Khazar's eldest son, which is none other than Chris. All dripped out, people wonder why the Duke wanted to meet with a fool like him anyway, and they say that he seems like a joke. Chris says that he knew it and that he is way too handsome, and it's all because he's just too damn good-looking. Mary, of course, is the ultimate hype man, saying that he sure is. He then spots some drinks and says that surely that's alcohol. As he walks over, the waitress says that he's not allowed to have any because he's underage, and instead of alcohol, he can have some ginger ale. They even start laughing at him. Chris can't believe that these people are so damn lame, and he doesn't want ginger ale, he wants alcohol. They then continue to announce the arrival of the young lords and young ladies. As the doors slowly open, we see them all walking out into the room. We are formally introduced to Esid, who is the second young lord, which we already know of, Julianne, who is the first young lady and has also been mentioned, and now the ones who haven't been introduced yet, such as Jian, the second young lady, and Misak, the third young lord. As they all start to walk forward, we see there are only 4 of them rather than all 5, and Chris says that the first young lord seems not to be in attendance. He wonders what Esid will say to him since he's the victim of his little game, the one that solidified his reputation. Esid completely walks by, not saying a single word, much to his surprise, and Chris is just annoyed that he won't look him in the eyes after everything he's done. He guesses that he is no better than him. Julianne, though, raises her skirt, giving him a slight greeting, which also catches him off guard, but he recognizes her as Julianne and remembers how his aunt told him to be careful of her. However, he doesn't sense anything in particular out of order. Chris says that he'll figure it out later. This is enough recon for today, and it's time for him to get back and prepare for the rite. A butler then appears behind him, clearing his throat, saying that his name is Fowler, and he is a summoner working for young Master Loin. Chris asks why that matters, and he says that he heard that someone who was unworthy will be participating in tomorrow's sacred dark rite, and he is worried that an underqualified participant might cause an accident, sullying the name of the Great Dark Clan. Chris asks if he is seriously trying to say that he's talking about him, and Fowler says that he just simply has to prove that he is not. Chris then looks up towards the upper floors and sees Loin glaring down at him, and Chris says that if he doesn't like him, he should step up himself and that they can have their little heart-to-heart during the rite. He says that he'll do it since it doesn't even sound like an inconvenience, and now he wants to see the party tricks of Fowler. Fowler says not here, since he's unarmed, and Chris asks if he really expects him to use a weapon to face some rat like himself. Fowler says that he will regret this, and Chris asks if he's sure since he thinks he's going to be the one to regret this. We see both Jen and Julianne staring at Chris, particularly Julianne. All of the guests start to look surprised by something, and we see what it is now as Fowler is getting his shit rocked by a bunch of spirits while they even start feeding Chris grapes and treating him like royalty. The guests wonder what the hell it is they are witnessing because Fowler started by summoning evil spirits, but they instantly turned against their summoner with just a single gesture. They wonder how he gained control so quickly. Chris asks if that was young Master Loin's wishes just now, and that's pretty unbecoming of a direct heir of the Dark Magic Clan. He should have just challenged him to a duel if he had any grievance. Loin says the incident has nothing to do with him. Chris says not even a fool would fall for that lie, but he'll just believe him this once. Now they can meet again during the sacred dark rite, and he sure does find him cowardly, but he'll make sure to teach him some manners next time. It's now the day of the dark rite as we see Chris entering, straight yawning. Aloe asks if he's not even the slightest bit nervous since he caused a ruckus yesterday. Chris asks why he came here even though he warned him not to, calling him little bro, and Aloe asks how he could push back the sacred dark right, calling him crazy. Loin then makes his way down the stairs, glaring at the rest like he's so much better than them, and Chris tells him just to wait. We then hear an older person's voice as they ask if everybody's assembled. They introduce themselves as Sebastian, the vice butler in charge of the main house. He says that he shall now take them to the sacred ground where the dark rite will take place. He taps the floor with his staff, sending out some weird colors, and it looks like a bad acid trip. Everybody else sees some stairs forming up underneath them, and they're surprised by this. Chris says that's not exactly what it is and it might be an illusionary art that materializes an imaginary space. Sebastian starts walking down them, but he's going extremely fast, and the rest start panicking, saying that he's leaving them. Since they're being left behind, they need to hurry as they start sticking close to him, following each and every turn. Some of the participants say this is weird and they thought they went underground, so why is there such a steep slope? Even Loin and Aloe look like they're struggling. Sebastian tells everybody to please hurry up as the ground will not support them forever, and they even start falling off into the void. The other participants look nervous, and Sebastian says that since they're late, he's going to be speeding up now, and he starts to move even faster than he did before. A little later, even more people have fallen off, and Loin says that losers should know their place and they don't deserve to be up here. We see him sweating, but then he spots Chris effortlessly glide past him, and he wonders how since he's not even sweating. Chris asks him if he's really out of breath and he guesses he's all bark and no bite, saying as a direct heir he should be better than this, saying surely they fed him a bunch of good potions. Chris says that their stupidity only made their bodies suffer and it's a waste to run earnestly in an illusionary space. No matter how hard he pushes himself, his stamina doesn't get drained at all, and just by twisting one spell, he can become invincible within this realm. Sebastian looks pleased, saying that he must be the young Master Christian. They finally get to where they're going, and everybody's panting, gassed out. Aloe asks why Chris is unscathed. He says this is why he should have trained his body more instead of riding his beast everywhere. We then hear a different voice welcoming everybody as a crystal forms in front of them. It floats around the room, and she says that as they may all know, this is the sacred ground where the purest of pure dark energy bursts forth, thus they call it the sacred darkness. She introduces herself as Rahu, the manager of the sacred ground, and she welcomes the young masters and young misses. She says what they will be doing today is obtaining the great pure darkness like the third-ranked demon king, the dark destroyer, the progenitor of the dark magic clan. A blue light then starts to form on the ground, weaving underneath every single one of them, and she says that there is not enough for all of them to share. All of the demon beasts inside will test their worthiness. Chris asks if all she's saying is that it's based on who arrives first, and she says he's very perceptive. Chris asks what if an unforeseen mishap occurs, making the competitors fight one another during the rite and if they will be disqualified. She says that because each of them will be on a different path, they should not run into one another, but on the off chance they do, they should avoid conflict. As the more time they waste, the better it will serve the other competitors. She starts to count down, saying that they need to focus up and prioritize their own safety and may fortune be with them. As the countdown is finally ending, they all start running off down their own paths. We see Sebastian and Rahu standing there, and Sebastian asks if she wants to bet some blood juice on who will win, but of course, she vanishes, and he can't believe that he got brushed off once more. We see Loin making his way forward down the tunnel. He spots a swarm of beasts ahead of him. They start preparing magic and leaping at him with fire in their mouths, and he starts to imbue his hand with aura as he smacks forward, hitting one in the throat and quickly moving from wolf to wolf, getting rid of them on the spot. He says that at best they are lower-ranked second-tier magic creatures and that these are nothing to him, an upper 2-star. Though he's sure that Chris is having a very rough time right now. According to the rules, each path is supposed to have the same distance and trial. However, he bribed a mage so that only Chris' path will have stronger demon beasts and that he's going to come across some stronger demon beasts by pure coincidence. He'll meet a tragic fate since any death that occurs during this is overlooked. It's going to be his grave. After a while, he finally comes across a door, and Loin says that this must be it to the sacred ground, and he knew he'd be the first one here. Chris asks what took him so long, as he thought he was going to die of boredom from all the waiting. Lo asks how he got here so fast, and Chris says there wasn't much to it. Lo says that's not possible, as his path should have had much stronger monsters, and then he closes his mouth, realizing what he was saying. Chris smiles, saying no wonder he thought they were at a higher level than they should be, so it was all his doing. Lo asks who he is to throw allegations like this. Chris says that it's only going to be the two of them for a bit, asking if there's any need for formalities. Lo calls him an arrogant asshole, saying it's taboo for competitors to clash during the fight, but he's going to crush him here and now. As he swings forward, Chris easily dodges the attack and says that he's using magic combat arts. It's a combat technique that explodes magic power at close range or disables his opponents by snapping their joints. Chris continuously avoids each and every one of the attacks to the point that he's getting annoyed, and Lo even calls him a slippery rat. Lo then spots Chris' hand, thinking that it's an opening, and charges forward, saying that he's going to break him. Chris calls him a dumbass and he grabs his wrist instead, putting him into an arm hold. He tells him not to cry even if it hurts, and then all we hear is the sound of it snapping, and he lets out a very loud scream. We then see Aloe running down the hallway, asking if he's too late, only to see Lo and another competitor both laying on the floor. Aloe asks Chris if he did this, and Chris calls him slow as hell, asking if he's going to faint on his own now or if he needs to beat him until he does. Aloe says that he hasn't been sitting around doing nothing and to come at him. Of course, he got folded like an omelet, and Chris says that was some real déjà vu and he's sure they'll find them if he just leaves them here. He explains that 5 years from now, the first great war against the Alliance will break out, and he needs to have the Dark Magic clan within his grasp before then, which is why he can't share even an ounce of the darkness with them. And since he's done cleaning up, it's time for him to take possession of the sacred darkness once and for all. The sacred darkness is the power that grants a fiend the possibility of becoming a true transcendent. The Duke, who is known to have absorbed 80% of it, is one of the strongest alive, even amongst the demon monarchs. The Dark Destroyer also absorbed more than 90% of the pure dark energy to become a demon king, meaning if he can make 100% of the dark energy his, he can exceed even the demon emperor himself. As he stands before it, he slowly stretches his hand out until it starts pouring through all of his paths. It then jumps to some people saying that was unbelievable, every other person than Chris was eliminated. This is a disaster, as the young Master Lo is in serious condition. They start saying that he probably used a trick or a band magic tool and that they need to investigate thoroughly and punish him. Jian says that won't be necessary, as that bastard won't be able to enter the sacred ground anyway. The fact that he hasn't left for 2 days must mean that, unless this is all time required to absorb the sacred darkness due to the quantity, he has already been crushed by the sacred darkness and died. Even the Duke had run into a limit of how much he could absorb, and that Chris is definitely dead, and there won't even be a corpse left behind. As she walks away, she closes the door and looks pissed, saying that even if he comes back alive, she'll kill him herself because when her father died during his battle against the Alliance, only she and Lone were adopted by their uncle Viscount Langham. That's why her footing within the clan is already unstable, and since Lo wasn't able to receive the sacred darkness either, no one will support him in becoming the successor, and that she will pay Chris back for this indignity. Even some of them start saying that the good-for-nothing still isn't out yet and that he must already be dead, and it's punishment for being greedy without knowing his place. They say that even the ghost over there is waiting for her master, but she'll soon meet her master's ghost. It seems Mary puts a hole into one of the bags, pretty much giving them a warning, and she says that her heart flutters as she waits for her young master, but if they keep being noisy around her, she'll turn them into ghosts under her control. They run away, saying they're sorry, and she returns back to being a cutie pie, telling Chris to return quickly, as a man who makes a maiden wait is not cool at all. It then jumps to Chris sweating heavily, saying that this is an unending darkness that chokes the breath from his throat and that he's only around the 70% mark and that this is a lot more difficult than he expected, but he has to endure no matter what. The real test will begin around the 90% mark, and if he takes in too much and exceeds his limit, his core will shatter and he will die here before the war even starts. He then realizes something, saying that's right, and that if only he had a dragon heart. The dragon has the largest container for their core, so even if it's just for a few minutes, he can imitate its heart. There might be something about it. As he does his best to do so, even more energy is being absorbed, and it slowly starts to shatter. He says this is his limit and needs to stop, and we hear Methan asking him if he needs help. He then sees her appear in front of him in this subspace, and she's a big girl, but he is just taken aback. He asks how a demon is in this space, and she says that the power of demons is to communicate within darkness, and this poses no difficulty to her, and that it is possible for her to help him in this instance without any conditions. He asks why, and she laughs, saying that it's just a fleeting whim and to take her hand, as it will let him take in all of the sacred darkness. It then jumps to 1 week later, as the Duke is setting down his cup. He says that he would be hard-pressed to say that Chris is still alive when there has been no news at all. Marin seems confused, asking why he would be so greedy to this point, and Simon says that Viscount Langham also agrees with him and he wishes to close the pathway leading to the sacred ground soon. The Duke thinks about it and asks Simon if he will give the command. The Duke says that he is just trying to test this old man, and he asks Simon if he thinks that Reckless Child is still alive. Simon says the odds are close to 0, but that he is pretty interesting, so he doesn't actually know. The Duke thinks about it a little longer, saying 1 day, and that they'll keep it open for legit just 1 more day. Marin sighs out of relief, and Simon says that he'll go spread the word.